Introduction. I write in exile from a remote and obscure planet called Earth, to which the hierarchy has sent me for having wanted to violate the forbidden zone of the universe. I have already lived 11 earthly lives and have not been able to return to my place of origin. Something in the magnificent focus of the divine stimulated a mystery that no lesson or suffering has been able to unveil, and that keeps me imprisoned in this strange and distant place ruled by laws that do not match my heavenly nature. I write as one more attempt to share because that's what I've learned to do. I write because I remember, and remembering without manifesting it suffocates me. I have learned to survive despite all the attempts of the inhabitants of this planet to mold me to their lifestyle. I have met great sages who have been my teachers, and the mystery of what the earthly woman hides has fascinated me throughout all my lives. I have become known among the inhabitants of this planet at different times. I appeared in the Bible as Andrew, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, in the scandals of the French courts of the 15th century, and among the great Kabbalists of Safed. I have decided to return to my home planet, no matter what it takes, and this writing is an attempt to heal my memory and understand my own development. I trust that through its elaboration I will find the lost key, the secret procedure that will free me from this planetary prison and its inhabitants, but do not misinterpret my words in the sense of absence of affection. I am profoundly grateful to this planet because I have lived experiences on it that are not lived in any other part of the universe. Here I have found beings from all walks of life and with all tendencies. The largest, some of them forgetting themselves but others with their heads held high, remembering each other. The humiliations have exalted me after sinking into despair, and little by little I have been returning to love for myself. I find that I include all my experiences and nothing can define me. Instead, I flow until I find something unresolved again. And I stay in it and return until I consider it mine as well. In this expansion I begin to recognize myself as the whole, and each time my separate existence disappears to make way for someone closer to myself. But this self is neither a longing nor a thought. It is more like a feeling that includes all the states, all the emotions, and even the pains that I experience. For all this I am grateful to this correctional facility of the exiles of the universe. Without a doubt, at times I have been very happy here and I have almost decided to stay, but I have a call and I cannot stop hearing it. Have I learned what I need to do and if it's my time? Perhaps I also decide that, but I know that I am not alone and that the most loving Father exists. I refer to him and let him alone judge me. Chapter 1, Andromeda. I believe I haven't been able to remember anything before Andromeda. Maybe that's where I come from, although I don't understand how you decide to be born for the first time or who decides it. Perhaps the most loving Father focuses on a new being, a new form of manifestation, and converges his existence into a peculiar and new model of himself. It's wonderful that someone can update that. It takes a true love of adventure and a kind of unabashed daring to do it. At that level, however, there should be no such thing as impudence, but rather a state of absolute freedom and a desire to let one of one's own parties be in order to see how far it can go. It's like letting a daughter go and being satisfied with observing where she goes, what she learns, and how much she can grow and understand herself. It would seem that plan-centered enough for those who have every possibility. I am far from understanding God, but if He created me in Andromeda and then set me free but has kept an eye on me, rejoicing in my experiences and learnings, taking care that I do not exceed my own limits, sending me protectors every time I make mistakes and giving me a new step when I get closer to Him, I can't help but feel admiration and respect for His magnificence. I don't think I was created by chance and without an intention, but I still can't understand it, although I am beginning to glimpse its meaning and direction, and this is nothing more than the expansion in my capacity to love. Together with me, He created another being, and my life in Andromeda was totally linked to His existence. The Andromeda civilization was at that time at a high level in the hierarchy of the universe. We knew of the existence of civilizations more advanced than ours and of countless worlds in different degrees of maturation. I have discovered that Elion exists to a more mature degree than Andromeda and that beyond Elion lie even more expanded civilizations of which I don't even know the name. In these lifetimes I have been in contact with several descendants of Elion and with some original Elionites such as Captain Domin. I listen to him, but I can't even imagine the state of his consciousness, so different and advanced from my own. I have also met other Andromeda exiles. In Andromeda you receive the notification of the creation of new beings and in my case, the news of the birth of soulmates. My original name was Odysseus and my partner Balikai's name was my partner's. In Andromeda one penetrates and is penetrated all the time in a constant state of love. Balikai and I started experiencing it from a very young age. Andromeda had, at that time, solved most of its political and maintenance problems. The government was unified and its direction was spiritual. The ruling leaders were great initiates and the population was aware that development consisted of an increased ability to maintain and expand contact with spirit through meditation practices. The problems of food, shelter and clothing were practically solved, and both I and Balikai were trained to remain in an almost constant meditative state. The architecture of Andromeda was of a balanced and perfect geometry. In addition to the dwellings, there were large meditation centers in which thousands of inhabitants gathered, divided according to the level of consciousness they had reached. The main building of the whole architectural complex was situated in a privileged position and consisted of a huge glass dome in the center of which was kept lit. It provides an energy source of high frequency and intensity. In that temple the initiations of the new beings were carried out, and when someone managed to change their state, they were taken there to help them increase their vital energy. Communication between the inhabitants was direct, i.e., telepathic, and its depth depended on the degree of relations. There were couples that had almost always been created simultaneously and whose mental and emotional structure allowed them an almost total capacity for unification. The new beings were conceived in a human-like way, but the sexual act took place after the attainment of a perfect energetic coupling and a proper visualization of the focus of the divine portion to be manifested. Sexual intercourse, outside of this process of conception, was direct, that is, through energetic and not physical penetration. However, freedom from these practices was almost total in the sense that it depended on the tastes and spontaneity of the participants. Since the planet's weather conditions were ideal, no protective clothing was required and the inhabitants of Andromeda only used a thin, transparent cloth of superconducting material to cover themselves. Children and young people were trained in the practice of meditation, in the knowledge and management of bodily and mental energy, and in the sciences and arts that by the time had already reached a high degree of sophistication. Remote viewing was used to get to know other planets and places in the universe, but people also traveled in spaceships both to carry out exchanges with other civilizations and to get to know other regions of the universe. The education of the youth included these trips and learning how to use the devices to make them. In addition, the main languages used by different civilizations of the same and different galaxies and the history and characteristics of them were taught. Space was known even in its most fundamental structure, which allowed great feats of modification of its curvatura. The mainline energy routes created by the hierarchy were known, which served to transit between different areas of the universe. The forbidden zone of the universe, populated by developing planets and nascent civilizations, was known exactly within its borders. The young people knew that it was not permissible to enter it because of the necessary isolation which the hierarchy had decreed in order to avoid disturbances in their processes of development and maturation. These were in charge of the dome of the hierarchy. It was made up of the beings of the highest spiritual development in the entire universe, who were the only ones capable of detecting and understanding the designs of the most loving Father. Penetration into the Forbidden Zone was punishable by exile on a corrective learning planet such as Earth. An agreement had been established between Andromeda and Allion that allowed the children of both civilizations to visit and get to know each other. The inhabitants of Allion occupied a higher level of development than those of Andromeda. This manifested itself in some behaviors such as transportation through atomic destructuring. In fact, the inhabitants of Allion practically no longer used ships to travel but dematerialized in one region and materialized in another at will. Even more advanced civilizations were known to live in a state similar to that of the lattice of spacetime, and for them neither distance nor time existed, so they could focus on any region of the universe without needing to teleport. Not even the inhabitants of Allion had succeeded in accomplishing such a wonder, but their atomic and molecular restructuring procedures were quite advanced with respect to those of Andromeda. On the other hand, in both Andromeda and Allion, life expectancy had been extended to the equivalent of 25,000 Earth years, and research was being done to further increase its duration. One of the Andromic practices of meditation was aimed at achieving the activation of the observer's alternate focuses. This was an attempt to achieve Allion-type transportation and even the ubiquity of the hierarchy, but only the most advanced among the inhabitants of Andromeda had made some satisfactory progress in that direction. Andromeda, on the other hand, enjoyed a well-deserved prestige, even among the upper echelons of the hierarchy, for the impulse and development of the emotional center of its inhabitants. The condition of permanence in a state of love was a singular achievement of the Andromic civilization. As part of our upbringing, and on one of the visits of the children of Allion, Balikai and I met Amansi's daughter, named Alanmay. Together we played with our pets, capricious and woolly beings with flattened limbs and in the shape of lettuce leaves that liked to pet us and followed us everywhere. The girl was exquisite, and through her we learned about the customs of the Allion and she got to know ours. Balikai and I had planned to spend some time traveling and getting to know other planets. We made the request to the Karmic Council and they accepted it. We prepared for 5 stellar years, and in that time, our love grew and deepened. We hardly separated, and what we liked most was the creation and delight of novel mental bodies and music. The latter was of astonishing originality. The great works of music were mathematically perfect and represented different models of the organization of the universe and its inhabitants. For endless days we listened to her, changing her emotional state and transforming ourselves into the beings that this celestial music wanted to represent. The ego was a virtually unknown structure in Andromeda. Everyone there felt different but simultaneously the same as the rest. It was very clear, to everyone, that the path involved being oneself in the absence of definitions, and everyone was looking for opportunities to expand. The love between Bali Kai and I was one of those opportunities, and we both knew it. We had a clear life project, and this was associated with the maintenance and deepening of our feelings. We were considered an exemplary couple, and surely all of this favored the council's decision. We were assigned a small but perfectly conditioned ship to allow safe travel through the route's linear energetics. First we made several crossings to the nearby planets. We set the ship with the latest. Each stellar year is equivalent to 150 Earth years. Musical compositions created in Andromeda, and we delighted in the spectacles of the stars and the incredible landscapes of reddish, blue and violet worlds with various suns and a multitude of moons. On one occasion we floated almost an eternity on a silvery, roaring sea while making love. We discovered constellations and went into seas of crystalline pointed aeroliths, observing the reflection of the explosions of supernovas on their edges. Everything was beauty and adventure, and everything was tinged with a sense of indestructible love for each other. Nearing Stra, we were boarded by a patrol ship, and our state astonished them with admiration. We began to think that we had reached perfection. We could not conceive of a more exalted state than ours. We descended on a lovely and uninhabited planet. 2 suns lit up a deserted beach bathed by a hot sea. We looked at each other and decided that we had become gods. We were to manifest ourselves as such, and a forbidden idea crossed Bali Kai's mind at that moment. At first I rejected it, but everything pointed in that direction. For 2 stellar years we went through the extragalactic archives and finally found it. It was a planet whose inhabitants were divided by ancestral rivalries. In fact, analysis of the world's lines pointed to an 84% chance of self-destruction. It was the right place to test the strength of our love. We headed in their direction, and with a sense of shock we managed to cross the border of the forbidden zone of the universe. We knew that the hierarchy was watching us, but who were they to forbid such a compassionate act of greatness? Had we not maintained our love until we reached his divinization? Surely they would recognize in us the elect to reign in that world and bring it to our own elevation. The forbidden zone radiated an atmosphere of fear. It was there that the most dramatic transformations of the whole world took place. Universe. At times, entire planetary systems vanished, and at other times a planet reached a sufficient degree of maturity to be able to enter oneness with a civilization that agreed to guide them, with the permission of the hierarchy. The planet we were approaching was inhabited by savages, but the appearance of 2 visible gods was their opportunity to begin a development towards love. Our computers were already signaling the nearby presence of the planet when something began to go wrong. The ship lost stability, and Bali Kai and I knew the end had come. We hugged each other and were taken to a dome, and there we were separated. I didn't hear from Bali Kai again. But I imagine that, like me, he was allowed to say goodbye to his parents. I also learned that Dallin May had met a similar fate to ours, but I couldn't find out why. We were told that until we had learned what we had to learn, we would forget our origins, but there would always be a longing in our spirit, and she would be our guide. Kardam, my father and teacher, accompanied me while preparations were being made for my departure. Planet Earth was chosen for my exile, and the Karmic Council deemed that 11 reincarnations would have a 95% chance to teach me what I should learn. Kardam was a great computer expert, and before I connected to the dematerialization mechanism he promised me that he would help me. His last words were, "I love you and I will stand before you when you are ready to return toward the end of your 11th life." Chapter 11. India, Yosoi. The market in Tiruvannamalai was full of people, colors, and noises when I saw her. She walked as if surrounded by a golden halo, and her bearing was dignified and majestic. She was accompanied by another woman, probably her lower caste servant, dark-haired and with a humble sari. On the other hand, what a beauty! Something in me was activated, something strange, a kind of memory or longing. It made me want to go up to her and ask her, to take her in my arms and let the call flow to her, but I held back. The next day, I woke up sweaty and with a tightness in my chest. I couldn't live without her. But at the same time I couldn't say that it was her but something else, mysterious, that she had awakened that troubled me. I went to consult the village astrologer. He told me that the date was auspicious and that the feeling came from very old, from another place, and had karmic components. That one matched my feeling and I thanked him for it. My parents started to notice. Patanjali, was almost inaccessible to me. From an early age I knew him as self-absorbed, inquiring and almost always sitting in the garden completely absorbed during his meditation practices. My mother admired and respected him and told me and my siblings that her husband, our father, was reaching the third cycle of life and that he would soon leave us to go into the forest and live in contact with God without possessions and in total surrender to Purusha. I'm sure that this was how she prepared us so that when the time came to say goodbye we could accept her as she had done. My mother was convinced that her husband was a saint and that he had fulfilled his role as father and husband perfectly. I had never heard him argue or fight. At meals we all blessed the food while he prayed and my mother served us. I wasn't interested in meditation. I felt it as a rival to my father's company, but I never expressed it openly. Instead, rituals fascinated me. Every morning I would accompany my father to the temple and there we would pray before an image of Shiva. He told me that Shiva taught how to transform the negative into positive by placing oneself beyond duality. On the way home we would always stop by to say hello to the sacred elephant. His caretaker had painted his skin with intricate patterns and on his large head he had traced 3 parallel white lines and a large red circle between his eyebrows. I caressed his trunk and he placed it on my head as if giving me the morning blessing. Afterwards we would have breakfast with the whole family and when we finished I would accompany my father to work. He sold fabrics in the market and I helped him with his business. My brothers were young, and they were engaged in instruction in one of the halls of the temple. I had already finished my studies and was entering the second cycle of life. Maybe that's why I couldn't get the sight of that girl in the market out of my mind. My mother questioned me 2 days later. She was very intuitive, and she was probably surprised by my worried countenance and my reddish eyes, indicative of insomnia. He came up to me after lunch and took me to his side. "What's wrong with you?" she asked me worriedly. I told him everything, and gave him an indication of the girl's physiognomy and dress. I confessed the astrologer's opinion and after listening to me he told me to calm down. The wedding took place 3 weeks later. Both families were of the Brahmana caste and there had been no problem in reaching an agreement. For 20 years, my wife Soraya and I lived a quiet life. We had 6 daughters and 2 sons. On a trip to the Bay of Bengal, I visited my brother, Amam, who was a fisherman of the Ahama people. He told me, India, Yo soy 23. I decided to go and live with my family in his village. In the mornings we went fishing while the children played on the beach, swam and attended to be educated. Soraya was a good housewife and the small hut that served as our home was always kept clean and tidy. One afternoon, on our way back from the sea, Amam and I were surprised to notice smoke coming from the village. The sea was choppy and it took us over an hour to disembark. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt like it was going to burst out of my chest because the smoke seemed to rise from our houses, which in the distance were engulfed in fire. Desperate and struggling with the waves, we were finally able to reach the beach. The atmosphere was gloomy and a pungent smell of burning flesh hung in the air. The coconut trees that lined the beach with their scorched leaves and the large palm trees of the village had witnessed the tragedy. We searched for our families and all we found were the unrecognizable remains of dozens of charred corpses placed on top of each other. For 9 days I couldn't sleep, and my bulging eyes seemed to throw sparks in all directions. I existed in a state of utter stupor without understanding what had happened and with a desire to bury myself in the sand or abandon myself to the sea without a fight. I couldn't eat, and only occasionally would I cut a coconut and quench my thirst with its sweet, thick juice. One night, without telling my brother, I started walking without knowing where my steps were taking me. I walked for a week without stopping until the landscape began to transform and the hot, jungle weather became wet and cold. I shuffled through a dense forest. The trees and moss grew denser and denser until in the heart of the place, the closed foliage barely let in the sun's rays. Without strength and with a total ignorance of the place where I was, I fainted. A fluffy, leaf-carpeted floor was my bed. I woke up somewhere else. The warmth of a campfire warmed me, and with an enormous effort I caught sight in front of me a thin man with a huge beard and covered only with a small loincloth. Before I could recognize him, I fell back into unconsciousness. The same experience was repeated on several occasions at intervals that seemed to pass without intermission. Later I learned that it took me 13 days to recover and that the blurred human figure that had saved me was my father Patanjali. 10 years before he had said goodbye to me, my brothers and my mother, and isolated in that same forest to which my steps and a mysterious power had guided me. Patanjali had been meditating in silence and during those 10 years he had not had contact with any other human being or uttered a single word. I stayed with my father until he died. I then devoted myself to writing down his teachings in the form of aphorisms. I lived 20 more years and never left the forest. I fed on roots and wild fruits. I collected rainwater, which I used to quench my thirst and cleanse myself. I longed for Soraya and my children, and the practices I learned from my father Patanjali calmed my spirit and satisfied my mind, but never completely. Something inside me remained a mystery until I died. At that moment a veil was torn and I could perceive a state of love that calmed me, but only for an instant. Patanjali had shown me that the secret of the self lay in silence, in the inhibition of all mental activity. His message was clearly described in the aphorisms which I myself had inscribed on large rocks so that they would remain intact until found by other seekers. The last 5 years of my first life on this planet were spent in a state of silence. There was only me, heaven and earth. During that time I did not utter a word, and no thought appeared in my mind. Only at the moment of death did 2 words come from my lips, I am. Chapter 111. Egypt. I have. Dallin May and I met again in Egypt but as twin brothers. The Karmic Council had decided so. My gestation was human, but Dallin May was embedded in my mother's womb by the hierarchy, making her occupy the body of the fetus that was developing next to me. Obviously I was not aware of this during this, my second earthly life. Dallin May, like me, was born in a male body. As children we used to hide behind the stone blocks that the pharaoh's slaves used for the construction of the Great Pyramids and the monumental initiatory temples. There, out of sight of workers and foremen and in low voices, we talked for hours. We both possessed the uncanny ability to see perfect images with our eyes closed and to receive messages from strange sources. We shared the former and the latter, verbalizing them as they happened. Our food was poor and of poor quality and we hardly saw our parents, who spent the whole day working for Pharaoh. We knew that we had to be very careful because if we were caught or heard we would be punished terribly. When we were teenagers, while we were carrying straw, we heard a rumor that filled us with hope. A great man named Moses had arisen who promised to free us from slavery. We went to hear it several times and were amazed by its power and presence. Then very strange things started to happen. One day the Nile turned to blood. For weeks, plagues of locusts, forming dense, sticky clouds, lashed the plantations. Frogs by the millions fell from the sky, and one terrible night death penetrated the Egyptian chambers seeking his firstborn to destroy. At dawn that night, the news spread like the wet, hot wind of the Nile. Pharaoh set us free, guided by that magnificent man, Moses. We carried our belongings on our shoulders and a rob wagon, and together with thousands of others like us, we left the place where we were born. We crossed the Red Sea between 2 gigantic pillars of water that Moses had opened, and after several weeks of a fatiguing and risky trek, we made camp on the slopes of a huge mountain, the Sinai. Moses spoke to us one stormy afternoon. In the midst of lightning, he told us that he would go up the mountain to talk to Jehovah and then come down to us. We waited for him for weeks and it wouldn't go down. We complained to Aaron, his brother, and he ordered us to build a golden idol. Women brazenly abandoned their husbands and gave themselves sexually to anyone. My brother and I participated in that for a few days, but tired and realizing that no one was paying attention to us, we continued with our dialogues and images. These had grown stronger in clarity as had our thoughts. However, they lacked direction, as if a floodgate had opened and turbulent and uncontrolled waters had spilled out and flooded a valley. Something similar happened to Moses when he came down from the mountain. He shouted like thunder and with tremendous fury destroyed 2 large flat stones he was carrying. There something terrible began. The brothers began to kill each other, and at the end of several days, 3,000 unburied corpses lay abandoned in the camp. Then Moses spoke to us again. He said he would climb the mount again and that it would be Israel's last chance. This time no one asked Aaron to build an idol. Fear paralyzed our bowels as we buried the dead and awaited the second descent of Moses. At last he appeared and read to us Jehovah's message. We had, at last, laws on which to base our lives. The acceptances of Egypt. I have 27. We felt safe but something happened then. Someone accused us to the judges and told them that my brother and I had blasphemed Jehovah and Moses. He had heard us talking about our images and messages. They sent for us and put us on trial. They decreed that one of the 2 should die. I went ahead and blamed myself for everything. I would die and not my brother, but he did the same. There was confusion and the judges looked at each other as if asking for advice. The trial dragged on for several hours until my brother's death was decreed. An executioner stepped forward and plunged his knife into his heart. In desperation, I threw myself against the judges and was also killed. I fell beside my brother's corpse, and taking him by the hand, I expired. Chapter 4. Japan. There Pienso. The sun was reflected in the puddles of the rice plantation. The little bushes protruded from the placid, silvery surface of the water, and my footsteps produced undulations in it, which, when they collided with the rice stalks, multiplied into infinite shapes. At dusk, a milky full moon intoxicated the dark, omnipresent atmosphere. My life was that wandering between the regions, the pastures and the forests looking for an opponent. As I did so, I tried to quiet the thoughts in my mind by concentrating on the movements of my body and the images of my eyes. However, it was all in vain. Thousands of thoughts assailed me. along with memories of the struggles I had participated in and the battles I had won. I was a warlord and my dress attested to it. It was uncomfortable to walk around in armor and I protected my head with a helmet, but nothing and no one would be able to convince me to take it off. In the villages I passed through, people looked at me with respect and fear. If I entered a tavern, no one dared to approach me. I stood watching the parishioners. I waited for any opportunity to prove my samurai strength, but no one dared to challenge me. My appearance was fierce and full of power, and within me a living flame fueled by a desire for violence remained permanently burning. I never asked myself why I was so aggressive. It was so natural and constant to me that there was no other point of reference or contrast that would have enabled me to become aware of its existence. 30 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. When no one was looking at me and I was safe, I would lie down by a tree and let myself be enveloped in immense melancholy and sadness. I missed someone and every time I tried to remember, my anger flared up uncontrollably and for no apparent reason. One afternoon I saw in the distance a figure similar to mine slowly approaching. His walk amazed me. He was slow and fully conscious. He wore black armor and a golden sword protruded from his body held by a leather belt. I knew then that the decisive day had come to me, opponent of my height. I started walking in his direction. It was obvious that he had become aware of my presence, and probably the same thought went through his mind as mine. I saw him place his right hand on the hilt of his sword. His gesture had been almost imperceptible and perfect. I was astonished again and stopped walking. I did the same as he did, but the instant I felt the steely cold of the hilt of my sword, I judged myself. At that moment, he burst out laughing and I was furious like never before in my life. I roared with anger as he continued to laugh non-stop. In an instinctive and uncontrollable act, I drew my sword and furiously rushed to the attack. I could see a glint of malice in his eyes and knew he was superior to me. He received my first attack with a smile of pleasure on his mouth, which made me even more enraged. With all the strength of my arm I threw a terrible blow. I remembered at that moment that I had cut off several heads with a single slash with similar blows, but it did not make a dent in him. I was astonished again, and the thought of death pierced my mind like a knife. Then something inconceivable happened. My opponent let out a powerful exclamation and leapt into the air in front of me. He floated with his sword drawn, then slowly descended, landing noiselessly on the ground. That completely paralyzed me. I plunged the tip of my sword into the ground and opened my arms in a gesture of defeat and acceptance of his infinite superiority. Instead of piercing me with his sword, he also thrust it into the ground and prostrated himself before me in humility. That is how it remained. Japan's Pienso 31. We spent several minutes while a golden eagle circled above our heads. At last he spoke, and his voice penetrated me to the core. He said he accepted my defeat as a victory and my friendship as a blessing. My permanent anger completely vanished and my eyes filled with tears. From that moment on he became my teacher. I followed him everywhere and never told me his name or made any reference to his story. In the winter he walked on the snow as if he floated in such a way that he left no footprints in it. In the summer, while I was perspiring, he remained cool and untired. He hardly ate, but when he did, the act took on a sacred aspect. It taught me to think clearly and to shut my mind completely. In that silence everything responded and knowledge flowed unhindered. He lived to the age of 130 without ever getting sick. A day before his death, he called me to his side, handed me his sword, and said goodbye to me with a smile. I have been very lucky because, like him, one morning I saw in the distance a young warrior, inexperienced and angry as I had been. And with a slow and fully conscious walk I approached him with a smile on my lips. Chapter 5. Tibet, de Asiento. Sitting in a semicircle, I and my friend stood absorbed in contemplating him, and when he spoke we did not miss a single word. He was totally unpredictable in his expression and demeanor, yet he always radiated love and compassion. His name was Milarepa. He looked at us and with a mischievous expression on his face asked, "Is space obtrusive?" We shook our heads, "Of course not." "Then move," he ordered. We tried to do it. But something very strange had happened. Space had solidified and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't. It looked like we had been embedded inside a rock. Several minutes passed and as suddenly as it had begun, suddenly the materialization effect disappeared and we were able to move. We turned in all directions as if looking for what to attribute the miraculous effect to, while Milarepa laughed at our astonishment. We were in a beautiful valley, a few meters from a river of crystal clear water that crawled bubbly, murmuring placidly. In front of us stood the gigantic mass of Nanga Parbat, crowned with snow, and to the right a colossal rock seemed to bear witness to what was happening. Milarepa asked again, "Is that rock obtrusive?" We looked at each other and nodded, though not as confidently as before. Milarepa rose from his place and with a nimble walk approached the rock. Without any apparent effort and with total mastery, he penetrated it and traversed it as if it did not exist. He didn't come back to us, but kept walking until he was lost in the distance. 34 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. We knew he wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. It had always been that way. We would meet with him, he would teach us, and then he would come back just after the lapse of time during which we were able to understand the last lesson. I had tried to follow him because nothing mattered more to me than being by his side, but I had never succeeded. Not that he rejected or refused me, but his energy and vigor were such that I hardly slept, and accompanying him at his own pace was impossible. The last time I had done it, I was exhausted after 7 days of forced marching. I had kept to him using all the invigorating and mindfulness maintenance techniques I had learned from him, but my limit was a river, in full flood, which he walked across in its waters, while I did not even dare to swim in its raging currents. Frustrated, I went back to till the land on the mountainside that belonged to my family. Sometimes, while harvesting, I would hear an intense humming sound coming from the clouds. I turned in that direction and saw Milarepa flying serenely in the heights. Several months passed before the next session. We met again in a semicircle and, as always, remained absorbed in watching him. He didn't make a move, but a spiral of radiant energy came out of his chest and focused on mine. My heart began to pound and my breathing became disturbed. The force of the impact frightened me at first, but then I began to feel an almost intolerable emotion. It was pure love, as if it had been distilled in a sublime and very fine still. It filled me to the last and most recessed pores of my body. He had no concrete referent. Where he turned, there he focused, from an insect for which he felt the most sublime tenderness to a cloud that he penetrated, loving each of its tiny vaporizations. Not to mention my friends or Milarepa himself. He felt each and every one of them with such compassion and affection that it was difficult to remain still without expressing it openly. I am sure it was the same with them, such was the intensity and brilliance of their eyes. On this occasion, Milarepa didn't leave. He remained with us all day without uttering a word. And extra. Tibet, they are 135. Going from his chest, that spiral that continued to activate our heart without slowing down or fatigue. I understood that he lived in that state and that nothing could compare to the possibility of learning to stay there permanently. I didn't see Milarepa again until 30 years later, the very day he died. We gather at his deathbed, his first and most loyal disciples. He gave each of us a message and promised to protect me from the other world. He knew that my life had changed since that session in which his heart had activated mine. From that day on, I began to feel with an intensity previously unknown to me. He had opened a door to my heart and activated everything. For a long time I suffered from not being able to tolerate the force of my feelings, but little by little I got used to them and my life changed, taking on a different quality. I never stopped tilling the field, and every sunrise and sunset that I saw in that life filled me with such a sense of beauty and bliss that I always lived thanking Milarepa for the gift of teaching me to feel. Chapter 6. Jerusalem, I Want To. We had painted the house white inside and outside, and I remember Miriam with her blonde hair floating in the breeze, barefoot and dressed in a wide white dress that the wind made dance gracefully. He said goodbye to me every morning with a sign of farewell, and he greeted me every evening with more beautiful and joyful every day. The street where we lived was made of dirt and the footprints of his feet were inscribed on it. Not only did he love her, I also revered her, and at night an immense desire to possess her accompanied me, always growing and nourished by her caresses and kisses. She was totally devoted to me and fulfilled myself by divining my desires and anticipating them with the feminine intuition and wisdom that always amazed me. We were both from the tribe of Levi, and I was a teacher in the temple. We used to walk through the streets of the Jerusalem that the sunsets painted golden. Sometimes we would sit on a rock and watch the sun go down as the gold changed its hue and slowly faded away, leaving in its place a night full of bright stars. When the wind blew, delivering the scent of olive trees and smells them of night, we held hands and felt the delicious flow of love rushing through our slender, young bodies. Some nights, we would invite other couples to our home and talk about the latest happenings while Miriam warmed the tea and offered us honey-sweetened rolls. In the mornings, Miriam and I, Andres, told each other about our dreams, and when she dreamed of a girl, we knew that God had decided to send us a daughter. 38 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. We had wanted it for years and finally our longing was fulfilled. We call our daughter Esther. She was red-haired and very mischievous. There was no greater joy than watching her grow. Messengers from Galilee broke the news to us in the temple. A prodigious young man had appeared, speaking as the prophets had done. A commission was sent to invite him to dialogue with the rabbis, and he accepted. We all gathered in a room, and the young man named Joshua left us overwhelmed with admiration but also with fear. He spoke with a confidence that was strange for his young age, but what he said felt to come from a center full of inspiration and wisdom. I told Miriam what had happened, and so did she. He was interested. News about Joshua was discussed with increasing fervor. We all wondered about the origin of his wisdom and the miracles attributed to him. They said that he cured terrible diseases just by touching patients and that large crowds followed him. We were alarmed when we heard what appeared to be a terrible blasphemy attributed to this young man. We were told that he called himself Son of God and Messiah. We called him back to the temple, and there we confirmed our suspicions. We forbade him to continue blaspheming, but he told us that he only obeyed his Father in heaven. I was so intrigued by Joshua and talked about him so much that Miriam convinced me to go talk to him, and I did. One afternoon I said goodbye to my family and went to look for him. I met him in the field, and as I approached he asked me to follow him. We sat under an olive tree and he told me who he was and what he had come for. He conquered me completely, and accepted me as a disciple. I went home and told Miriam what had happened. He looked at me with fear and a plea in his eyes. He seemed to have guessed what would happen. I started getting into trouble in the temple because of my association with Joshua and slowly drifted away from Miriam and my daughter. One morning I decided to leave everything behind so that I could be permanently by Joshua's side. Jerusalem, I 39. I left my family and joined him and 11 others who, like me, had decided to devote ourselves completely to following him. Miriam and Esther came looking for me, desperate because of the events. I received them and told them that nothing would be the same as it was. They asked me to go back to them and go back to living as before, but I refused. I wrote down everything I saw. I discovered a cave and kept the sealed manuscripts in large jars. I buried them in the hope that they would be found in the future. The events that followed are well known. Joshua was imprisoned, tried, and then crucified, but he did not die. He possessed such control over his body that he paralyzed it so that he would be believed dead. His mother Mary and some of his disciples took him to a cave where he recovered. One night, outwitting the Roman guards and in disguise, we fled Jerusalem. Joshua had lived in India during his youth. There he had learned from great masters. We walked for months and finally arrived in Kashmir in northern India. We settled there and spent the rest of our days there. Chapter 6. India, Analysis. The midday sun heated the Rajasthan desert to the point where being exposed became hell. However, this was precisely the time of day when the manure took on the right texture to be collected. Manure was our fuel, and with it we lit the fire to cook and warm ourselves at night. My friends and I would go out to walk the broken earth and the sandy dunes that glistened brightly, reflecting the yellow rays of the sun. Not even the monkeys bothered us, because at that hour they were lying down, taking advantage of the coolness of the shade of the few trees that were still alive. My complexion was dark, my skin strong, and my waist thin. I walked slowly, fully erect, because my dignity was the only thing that supported me. Men besieged me for my beauty, and so I hated my piercing eyes and thin lips. I lived with the women and we protected each other from the male insistence to satisfy their desires with our bodies. I had been raped so many times that every time I saw a man I wanted to inflict the same pain on him that his erect penis penetrating my dry flesh had caused me. However, I wanted to get married and have children. I didn't understand why I longed for it, and I spent hours analyzing the contradiction between my repulsion and my attraction. I belonged to the untouchable caste, and I was forbidden to enter the markets or the temples. I didn't know my parents, and the fear of leprosy terrified me. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I would see a face and a strange feeling would flow through my body. I drew it in the sand. 42 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. I tried to depict his long hair, blonde beard and piercing eyes, but I was never satisfied with the result. It was better to see it in my mind and analyze where it came from. I wanted to find the living man who owned that face, and when I despaired of the sun or couldn't stand the sting of my hands, produced by the manure, I imagined another life, next to that man, protected and loved. But I never met anyone even like it. Only once was I happy. I was walking through the desert when I saw in the distance a renunciant gathering manure like me. I wasn't afraid of him and went up to him. I knew he had sensed me, but he showed no sign of acknowledgement of my presence. He reassured me, and I stood by his side, feeling a security I had never experienced before. In the evening we sat next to each other and I told him about my life and confessed my sufferings. He looked at me with a look similar to the eyes of the face he saw in my mind and told me that it was all a learning process and that I should be patient and analyze the meaning of what was happening to me. I said goodbye to him at dawn and let him caress my body, for the first time aroused by contact with a man. I never saw him again, but his memory lived on in my memory and so did his words. My life was a learning experience, he had told me, and I had to analyze its meaning. Gradually, as I got older, I realized that his words reflected the truth. Toward the end of that life, my mind began to play strange tricks on me. When I woke up in the morning, I felt like my head was divided into dozens of compartments. Each of them was a complete and complex world. What was happening in each world was of total importance and drama. In every experience of every compartment, life and death were at stake, but there was absolutely nothing that united all the worlds together. I traveled between the realities they represented without finding myself. Sometimes I would remain in this situation for days at a time until at last a unified self appeared. But it didn't last long. The next morning the same thing happened to me again. My only India, Analysis 43. My recourse was to analyze what was happening in every section of my mind, trying, desperately, to find some clue that could help me, some way of union between all these worlds. I realized, towards the end of my days, that the union did not belong and could not be found from the compartments. The union belonged to another level that appeared suddenly and independent of the analysis but in some way aided by it. I died traveling between 3 compartments analyzing their contents. Chapter 8. Poland, Balance. From my window I could see them falling, slow and cushioned as if they had a life of their own. Some stuck to the glass driven by a gentle current of air. Then I would get as close as possible to observe their shapes. They were all perfect but different from each other. I wondered how that could be. On a stormy night, the number of snowflakes could not be counted even with the use of all possible combinations of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. However, there was a similarity. Each word had a numerical index resulting from the sum of the value of each letter. The number of words also seemed to be infinite, though probably less infinite than the number of flakes. 2 infinities? The memory of Reuben assailed me at that moment. I can't wait for it to be tomorrow so I can discuss it with him at the exit of the yeshiva. Reuben. How could it be that someone different from you was so akin to you? Reuben understood all my questions, lived them as his own, and helped me to answer them. My mind couldn't stop thinking. It was also true that there were families of words that matched in numerical value and families of families. The great rabbis and Kabbalists had to be thanked for having spent their entire lives telling and combining the words of the Torah for the legacy they left us. Reading the Torah with Gematria was like entering another universe and understanding it. If the words belonged to families, the flakes didn't? I went closer to the window and there they were. Some of them were more friendly. 46 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. And certainly one could abstract from their different forms, common components, something like their overall geometry. My mother came into my bedroom at that instant. He reminded me that I had to get up at 5 o'clock tomorrow because the roads were blocked by snow. I leaned back but couldn't stop thinking. Were Reuben and I, Mordecai, like the word families and common geometries of snowflakes? I decided to ask him tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow would be an interesting day, just as it had been today. I fell asleep and dreamed that Reuben had another name and was a woman. I remembered it for a moment as I woke up, Bali Kai, but it was lost in my memory as soon as I got up. The storm of the night had left a white landscape of transparent purity. I put on my gloves, put on my boots and a fur coat, and followed by my dog, I started walking in the direction of the yeshiva. He knew that Reuben would be doing something similar even though his house was located at the other end of town. The yeshiva occupied a wooden hut that welcomed us every morning along with other students and our teacher, the rabbi of the community. We would say morning prayers and then spend hours reading passages from the Talmud and discussing them. Our mind was looking for arguments, and our spirit was looking for verses from the Torah to defend them. Sometimes our passion was ignited when we entered into a complex disagreement. Each of us argued loudly defending his position and the rabbi tried to mediate between us but without much success. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon we interrupted for lunch and during that time Reuben and I took the opportunity to talk. I shared with him my thoughts on snowflakes and their relationship to Gematria. Reuben told me that my remarks needed a more general frame of reference that could encompass them and give them direction. I questioned him about it, and he thought for a moment, adopting his characteristic posture. He stroked his right ear and answered me very seriously, the question is about how to activate the Poland, Balance 47. Goes the meaning. I was excited, of course, I beamed. That's the essential question. We got bogged down into a delightful discussion from there. According to Reuben, everything that happened reflected the existence of a transcendent order in which there is no chance. It depended on the ability to see, the ability to find that order and thus assign meaning to events and words. The slightest action could be seen as representative of a transcendental pattern, and when that was achieved, life acquired an integral meaning. On the other hand, when an action was perceived in isolation and in a concrete way, its meaning was lost because it was detached from the overall pattern. I told him that behind his words was hidden a consideration that everything that happens is perfect and absolutely determined, and that I agreed with it. He looked at me with a smile and continued, not only that, but we participate in that order and can influence it. When that happens and we understand the meaning of our actions and they collaborate with the transcendent pattern, we feel fulfilled and filled with satisfaction. When, on the other hand, we act without that consciousness, our life seems to lose meaning and value. Of course, I agreed, but that doesn't mean there aren't events that are out of our control that we don't understand. It's a question, he replied, of knowing what our territory is and expanding it. Knowing what we participate in and how we do it is an unavoidable responsibility. Events that we feel are out of our control speak of the existence of a reality that we do not yet have access to, and we should be grateful for their occurrence. But, I said, sometimes we get frightened, and fear comes over us. Fear reflects a lack of faith, Reuben stated emphatically, and is not valid from any point of view. The rabbi interrupted us at that moment, inviting us to continue with the Talmud. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon it began to get dark and we all went back to our homes. I said goodbye to Reuben, feeling that I admired and loved him. The next day the same sequence of events was repeated, but nothing was the same as yesterday. As I got dressed, I recapitulated my 48 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. I talked to Reuben and realized that many of my actions were overlooked without thinking about their meaning. Why, for example, did I put on my right boot before my left? Or why was he looking in one direction and not another? If I participated in the global order, every movement of my body affected, in one way or another, the events, and I had better be aware of my participation in them. That day, the discussion with Reuben was about language and how it might or might not be meaningful. There are instruments that help us to understand, Reuben told me with a frown, such as gematria. You could transform each of my words into a numerical value and you would surely find commonalities that you would not otherwise perceive. When every word, he went on to say, is spoken from meaning, language becomes a sublime art. On the other hand, when what is said without that meaning is let out, then the meaning is lost or a concrete repetition is manifested. That was also true, I thought to myself without expressing it, but how annoying it must be to transform everything into numbers. Reuben asked me for my silence and asked me to express my thoughts, but I felt that they had no height and I was embarrassed to speak. At his insistence I told him what was going through my mind and he laughed out loud. Of course you don't need to do that, he told me when he finished with that laugh that gave me a mixture of embarrassment and anger. You don't realize, I claim, that we do this naturally as if we had a translation mechanism in our heads. The problem is that sometimes the machinery has loose or worn parts and there it is necessary to use an external instrument. But when everything works well, you don't need to use more than what is naturally given. The rabbi had overheard our discussion and at that moment interrupted us. It is precisely in order for it to work well that we use the study of the Talmud, and that is why yeshivot was invented. The three of us laughed and went into the cabin. The next day I felt an invisible presence accompany me. It was logical to think that we were not alone and that what came to our mind as original thoughts. Poland, Balance 49. It came from beings more advanced than us who offered us their help. I raised the question during the morning with a Talmudic comment, and everyone stared at me with a look of astonishment on their faces. You are still too young to penetrate these mysteries, the rabbi reprimanded me when he said goodbye to me. Be careful, he said with a serious expression on his face. From that day on, very strange things began to happen to me. When I was talking to Reuben, suddenly and without warning, I saw within my mind scenes of places that I had never imagined could exist: orange suns, scorching beaches and silvery seas. I saw myself floating in the middle of space with thousands of stars around me. I also began to hear music whose composer could only be God himself. My body could not withstand such visions and became seriously ill, but no doctor could figure out the cause. Reuben came to visit me, but in his presence and in the midst of very high fevers, the visions intensified. My parents forbade him to talk to me, and I stopped seeing him during a long and arduous convalescence from which I survived, thinner and paler than ever. I finally recovered and went back to the yeshiva, but I never saw Reuben again. He had gone to another village to continue his rabbinical education. I never left my village, and when my parents died, I inherited their house and got married. I lived to be 85 years old and never forgot Reuben and my conversations with him. Toward the end of that life I realized that truth is found in the exact balance of all things. Chapter 9. France. I wish the carpet did not let me hear my footsteps as I walked among gigantic porcelain vases, pictures depicting battles, and walls painted in various colors. Lamps hung from the ceiling with hundreds of candlelit crystals that reflected dozens of iridescent hues on their edges. I didn't even suspect that I was living in exorbitant luxury because that's how I was born and I never knew any other way of life. My father belonged to the French aristocracy. His name was Luis Antonio, and my mother would spend hours in front of gigantic mirrors trying on wigs of all shapes and colors. My brother was younger than me, and he was allowed to visit my mother as often as he wanted and spend whole mornings with her. On the other hand, this was forbidden to me. That's why he wanted her so much, and that's why he sneaked into that room. I knew that behind the door at the end of it was my mother's bedroom, and that if I didn't make a sound I could see her through the keyhole, without her guessing my presence. I didn't understand the reason for my mother's rejection and why my love grew every time my mother took me away from her. I felt terrible hatred and jealousy of my brother. Inside me, Everything was tinged with an unfulfilled and frustrated desire. I spent my afternoons watching the cooks prepare the exotic dishes that served to impress the dinner guests. I hated those dinners and at the same time I loved them. I was repelled by the artificiality I noticed in all the gestures, but I was attracted to them because on one side of the headboard where my father always sat was she, radiant and sophisticated. 52 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. Chatting with the guests. I didn't take my eyes off him and sometimes I forgot to eat so I wouldn't lose any of his movements. My brother, beside me, seemed to think of nothing but the viands and sweets that vanished from the plates and moved into his mouth to disappear there with rapidity and relish. I always wondered why my brother and I were different, and the desire and jealousy grew. I would do anything to flatter my mother and get her attention, but it was no use. On the other hand, my brother didn't pay attention to her and didn't even look at her, but she carried him in her arms, kissed him and caressed him. At night I clenched my jaws so they wouldn't hear me cry and lull me to sleep with my pillow, rocking slowly until sleep overcame me. When I turned 21, my father died. During a hunt he had grown cold and sick with pneumonia. He did not resist it and left this world after a terrible agony. A woman named Paulette began to frequent the castle. She and my mother spent the day together and sometimes the nights as well. I continued my habit of leaning out of the doorknob of my mother's bedroom, and one night I saw a sight that left me paralyzed with disgust and repulsion. My mother and that woman were naked and lying down on the bed kissing and caressing each other. All my frustrated desire exploded at that moment. With the strength of my pent-up courage overflowing, I knocked on the door and angrily entered the bedroom. The two women started screaming and screaming as I beat them. From that day on, my life became hell. As the firstborn, I had most of my father's inheritance. I was a breeder of hunting dogs, and from time to time I intervened in some political problem by supporting one or another friend by taking advantage of my father's influence. The intrigues of the court were repulsive to me, and I tried not to meddle more than absolutely necessary in them, but owing to my position, I could not refrain from doing so. My mother was a friend of the Empress and her friend Paulette, a courtesan of the worst kind. France, I wish 53. One morning, while I was training my dogs, I saw a royal carriage approaching, escorted by a group of soldiers. They asked for me and sent for me. A captain got out of the carriage and arrested me. I protested, but he informed me that he had been accused of conspiracy against the royal crown, and the order came from the Empress herself. I was imprisoned and, after a summary trial, sentenced to death by hanging. Paulette and my mother had plotted the whole thing. The moment I felt the tug of the noose around my neck, a huge desire for revenge enveloped me and the image of a blonde, barefoot woman in a white dress begging me to come home presented itself in my mind. Chapter 10. Safed, Yoveo. Every afternoon I saw them walking up and down the sidewalks of my native Sated. The city, with its houses scattered on the hills, seemed to light up in violet, as if those bodies radiated, from their grave, bearded features, that soft, warm light. The one that amazed me the most because of its luminosity was the one they called the Ari or Lion of Safed. He had arrived 2 years earlier and everyone else followed him and listened attentively. I already knew where they would be walking and without them noticing I took my herd of goats to graze near the paths where they walked. Suddenly, the Ari would stretch out his right arm as if pointing to something invisible, and all the others would utter exclamations of astonishment, as if something or someone really existed in the place the Ari had indicated. I tried to understand what they were saying, but I didn't dare get too close. Sometimes they visited cemeteries and seemed to converse with the dead. I didn't like that and so I would walk away and promise never to go near them again. However, that violet light appealed to me more than the flowers on the hills or the perfume and sinuous bodies of the maidens. The next day I would see them walking again and I would get as close as I could with my goats. Almost the whole day, apart from these walks, they remained locked up in the synagogue. Sometimes they could be heard singing or arguing in loud voices. One afternoon the Ari saw me. I noticed it because he pointed at me with his outstretched arm and then said something to his closest companion. I knew him, his name was Hayim, and since the Ari came to Safed he had not been separated from him. They said he was his chief disciple. I blushed with self-consciousness and fled for fear of being sent for. 56 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. For a week I avoided the group on their evening walks. Since I knew where they would walk, I purposely chose other directions and different places so as not to allow them to see me. On the 8th day, however, I could not stand it any longer. I missed its violet light and the feeling of warmth and inspiration it gave me. I took my goats to graze at an intersection of two paths and waited for them there. I heard their voices before I saw them, and though I was afraid, I waited for them. The Ari was leading the group with Chaim on his left. I saw the violet light again, and when they got close enough, I asked aloud, "Where does your violet light come from?" The Ari laughed and called me to his side. He asked me what I saw in my name. I told him, "My name is Daniel, and I was born in Safed." He invited me to walk by his side and we continued talking. My sensation was as if the ground on my feet had disappeared and I was floating in the middle of clouds with that violet light more intense than ever before. I confessed how I felt, and Ari laughed again. He invited me to study with him and accompany him on his walks. I agreed. Little by little, I began to understand the reason for the Ari's remarks. He detected the tombs of great sages and as he approached them he described their lives and teachings. I also understood why everyone admired him. He was always kind and tender, yet at the same time strong and daring. He didn't allow for distractions or forgetfulness. I became one of his 12 closest disciples, and like everyone else I was assigned one day of the week, Thursday, as a mercy seat for my spiritual progress, and one day a month, the 9th, when nothing could harm me. We called ourselves the Lion Cubs of Safed, and that's how they started to know us. Every Thursday the Ari would call me to his side and for hours he would talk to me about the state of my soul and teach me different techniques to help her progress. On one of those occasions he stared at me attentively, causing a tingling sensation and pressure in my eyebrow. He asked me to close my eyes and the violet light appeared inside my mind with such brilliance that I felt like I was blinded. Then, the Ari placed 2 of his fingers in contact with my forehead and told me about my past lives and all that I had done. Safed, Yoveo 57. I had learned from them. He told me that, as in Safed, I had been one of the 12 closest disciples of a great rabbi many centuries ago. He told me about India, Tibet, Egypt, and Poland. He told me that we had met, in the foothills of Mount Sinai, and when he saw my life before Fed the tone of his voice turned into a lament. I asked him what he was observing, but he wouldn't tell me. He only said that he understood why I needed him and promised that he would help me. I came away from that session completely confused. I already knew that souls transmigrated and that the way was to return to oneness. I suspected that Safed wasn't my first life, but I never imagined that anyone would have the ability to remember them. I was only at Ari's side for 1 year because an epidemic infected him with death, making him disappear from this world. During that year I asked him facts about that previous life, but he refused to share them with me. Instead, he was very interested in my behavior with women and asked me strange questions about my emotions toward them. I was single and didn't have much interest in getting married, but other than that, my relationships were pleasant and peaceful. The Ari seemed astonished to hear me and one day told me that it wouldn't happen for another 2 lifetimes. What would happen? I asked him in alarm, but he wouldn't answer. He assigned each of us a special type of meditation. Mine involved learning to love all creatures and control my emotions. It also taught me how to see. I had to be aware of all my actions and thoughts. Before entering the synagogue to pray, he had to offer an anonymous donation to the poor. The Ari taught me to avoid harming any living creature, from an ant to a man or woman, in both my thoughts and actions. Listening to the Ari speak was like standing next to an inexhaustible cascade of knowledge and wisdom. He said that everything was interconnected and that nothing happened by chance and that his ideas sprang from the same source that nourished life. 58 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum. That is why I could not write. Doing so was slower than thought. Chaim was in charge of writing down his words. He spoke to us of creation and that since a more divine contraction, God occupies everything and is a perfect unity. That is why he had to concentrate on himself in order to make room for creation. God, the endless or Ein Sof, shone and we had to purify ourselves in order to be illuminated by him without obstructive veils of his eternal and magnificent light. We practiced day and night to achieve this, and before going to bed we reviewed all the memories of our actions of the day to look for signs of mistakes and sins to be corrected and cleansed. When the epidemic hit Safed and the Ari became ill, he called us to his side and told us that he already knew that he would not live long and that in 3 days his body would die. That's how it happened. Chaim possessed a privileged mind. He was born, like me, in Safed, but he was the son of a rabbi while my family was a goat farmer. From childhood Chaim had contact with great rabbis and no less powerful magicians. He knew of the mysteries of the occult, and even before he met the Ari he was considered a great Kabbalist. He told me that he met the Ari in February 1571 and that he had not wanted to greet him before because he felt that he could teach him nothing. However, from his first conversation with him, he recognized the superiority of the Ari and asked him to accept him as a disciple. The Ari told him that he had come to Safed from Egypt to become his teacher and thus teach him everything he knew. Together, they went to Lake Tiberias and there the Ari made him take a sip of water. From that moment on, Chaim began to understand the teachings of the Ari and for the next 18 months they did not separate for a single day. Chaim had memorized the Ari system and, with the help of his notes, began to write a series of books to preserve it. I asked him to let me collaborate in that undertaking and although at first he refused, He later accepted my help. At night Hayim was visited by the spirit of the Ari and I witnessed, on several occasions, what happened between these two privileged beings. I accompanied Hayim to Jerusalem where we both spent time studying with Rabbi Elshek. Safed, Yoveo 59. I stayed in Jerusalem, captivated by his energy, while Hayim went to live in Damascus. In Jerusalem, the streets spoke to me of intense memories, and a white house with a dirt floor awakened in me a terrible nostalgia. I decided to return to Safed and there I taught Kabbalah and died peacefully after a lifetime dedicated to Torah study. I came to possess clairvoyance, which allowed me to predict certain events and realize the intentions of others. I always remembered Hayim but especially Ari. May God bless him with great happiness. Chapter 11. Rusha Iamuso. The restricted space made me desperate. I could only take 3 steps inside the cell, but my will was stronger. That prison. It didn't matter the time of day or the complaint of my neighbors, no matter what happened, I didn't stop my exercises. I did squats, ran in one place, did handstands, and practiced sit-ups. I had to stay strong and athletic because I knew this wouldn't be my last resting place. The revolution would triumph and I would regain my freedom along with the rest of my people. The people you want to liberate are not your people, my father had told me as a last attempt to make me forget Vladimir Ilyich and all his ideas. But it had been of no use. Besides, I wasn't the only one. 5 other comrades and 2 comrades, all Jews from the villages near mine, had come to an agreement. We knew that Vladimir Ilyich had been exiled to Siberia and it was there that we planned to travel to meet him. It was a great adventure and that's how we all lived it. If for us, the men of the group, the decision had been difficult, for the women it had implied a courage that we recognized and admired. We had planned to meet in Moscow and from there we would all leave together to fulfill our destiny. The train journey took 3 weeks, and the cold of the plains and steppes took most of the way. But the fire of our fearlessness and the knowledge that we would soon be at Vladimir Ilyич's side, sharing his table and feeding us with his tremendous will warmed us inside and kept us sheltered during the journey. For 2.5 years we lived in the cabin next door to that of our teacher and his wife Nadezhda. In that span, 62 Jacobo Grinberg Zilberbaum, we learned how to organize ourselves and gained power to prepare for the revolution. Vladimir Ilyich didn't think about anything else during the day, and Nadezhda told us that she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night to continue meditating on it. Vladimir said goodbye to us to go to Munich at the end of his sentence. We returned to Moscow and there we received the Iskra, a newspaper in which he wrote his ideas. We prepared for the revolution of 1905 and met Vladimir Ilyich again in November. Our group was, at that time, a veteran organization in the clandestine struggle and in the use of political strategies to gain adherence and organize power. We had managed, years before, to convince the Jewish Bund to support Vladimir Ilyich who adopted the pseudonym Lenin. This support gave him a majority of votes during the Second Marxist Congress and from then on we were called Bolsheviks. But the revolution of 1905 was defeated, Lenin was again condemned to exile and we were imprisoned. I can see, from my cell, the humiliations to which my comrades are subjected. For years we had fought together and their bravery as warriors had increased my admiration for them to a sublime degree. I loved Nasha, and now seeing what the jailers did to her made my blood boil with anger. At night I heard them sobbing and I swore to myself that I would survive in order to conquer power and put an end to all the injustice and corruption of the Tsarist regime. We were imprisoned for 5 years, but we came out of prison more determined and stronger than ever before. We went to live in St. Petersburg, Petrograd, and there we organized the workers and together with the soldiers we arrested the Tsar. We met Lenin again in April 1917, a month after the Tsar's abdication. We organized, with him, the final strategy for the triumph of the revolution, and on the afternoon of October 23, 1917, after a debate that lasted 10 hours, we convinced the Bolshevik Central Committee to carry out a coup d'état against Kerensky's provisional government. Russia, IU-63. For 15 days we trained the Bolshevik Red Guards and the revolutionary soldiers and sailors to strike the final blow, and on November 7 and 8 we arrested the members of the provisional government and elected Lenin as supreme leader of the revolution. For 7 years we built, side by side with Lenin, Soviet socialism, but at the same time we saw the accumulation of inordinate power in the hands of Stalin. Lenin tried to block Stalin's rise, but Stalin's cunning was more powerful than Lenin's measures. When Vladimir Ilyich died and Stalin came to power, we knew that would be the end of us. One morning we were arrested and shot. Chapter 12. Mexico, they are. 1. My mind starts its usual morning run. States of immobility and peace begin to transform into a sense of strangeness. Observation is no longer even valid because it has been included in a system of judgment. Nothingness begins and in that state I decide to get up. Again it is necessary to do because being is no longer feasible. There is a desire, and when a desire appears, life is no longer possible. The music of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach is not capable of transforming the experience. Despair and restlessness, the dark night of the spirit and the feeling of possessing a body with a superconscious associated with the moon. The only thing that can satisfy me is to be with Katya, and she remains in her own home, bright and accompanied for the rest of her life, while I am accompanied only by a mind full of resentments. What was no longer exists. The power of silence has been transformed into a totally alien knowledge. Contact has disappeared and has been replaced by judgment about its invisible unreality. I want to say that the impulse not to satisfy illusions and to keep myself in consideration of tangible reality and absent of falsehoods has led me to the total ignorance of my own world. My own world is totally intangible and ethereal. The decision has been provoked by her, or rather by the impulse to conquer it from her own world. In the beginning I was pure myself with no other considerations. I had to share my world because my world was reality. But strength has been on his side, and his tremendous capacity for dignity without sacrifice has transformed everything. Their world is more real and authentic, while mine only appears in exceptional conditions, and these require an absence of friction with thousands of conditions that are necessary for the body. The Unkribber is calming me down. I already notice the appearance of streams of clear consciousness and a slight but luminous mental balance. The others hardly appear, and that fills me with pride, but there they remain crouched behind some crack that he managed to keep relatively closed. The others are Katya and Katya. Read this to him and wait for some exclamation mark. How much dependence. And all because she doesn't want to live with me. She has asked me not to write on her behalf or mention her or make it public. Since everything is her, writing has been included as a totality within the prohibition. But describing it by another name and not mentioning recognizable aspects ends the ban. She can be anyone. This is and is not important, because importance is a matter of total relativity. In the end, nothing is important except not to harm others, whatever their condition. The problem is that not harming one harms another, and the exchange of damage and non-damage can become a maze of impressive complexity. The only solution under the yoke of non-harm is the only element of importance is isolation. The hermit from whom royal power comes according to my medieval tarot. That tarot is always right. Sarah had mentioned the existence of an agreement with protective entities. Every time a tarot reading is done, they appear accompanying the process. I've never been sure that there isn't an alternative unconscious explanation. To ascribe so much wisdom to the unconscious is disconcerting but at the same time full of hope. Katya and I had been told that we share a similar position of the dark moon. Unconscious, black moon or entities. The fact is that the tarot never fails, and it has reminded me that power comes from isolation. But the isolation in existence of the desire and fear of being replaced. On the other hand, it is unthinkable. In the end, if everything has become the same, isolation and non-isolation, observation or pure existence are distinguished only as relative mental categories. That doesn't happen with Katya. She has a real, unique and irreplaceable existence. My desire is to exist before her no matter what. Reciprocity of recognition or ferocity and forgetfulness. Thought flows freely as long as there are no prohibitions. The reason for so much exaggeration is obvious to those who know the conditions of the spirit, and obscure to those who regard the world as real and absolute. In the latter, everything seems to be subject to laws and conditioning, and the human condition is semi-cadaverous. That is to say, linked to a series of adjustments in charge of maintaining a state of collective hypnosis that tries not to frighten personal stories. It seems contradictory, but it's not. In reality, whoever makes this judgment on me belongs to the same world that I criticize because, whether I like it or not, I belong to it, and I have not been able to escape its influence. What satisfies is total honesty, because in it and through it everything flows towards the mystery of an unbridled creativity, and without it everything adjusts trying to maintain a main theme or myth that freezes the spirit, keeps it tied up and bored and ends up despairing. When the fundamental issue is transposed to be overcome, what was thought to be is shaken, and suddenly one finds oneself living in enlightened ignorance, that is, in the condition of the absence of judgments and of rebirth in total novelty. Everything is the first time, and each and every one of them exists without a past and without framing. Framing produces security and gives the illusion of knowledge, but it is nothing more than a substitute for true wisdom, and this wisdom does not admit of remaining fixed for more than a brief moment, at the risk of becoming a filter that prevents seeing. Any sustained flow of the present becomes a technique for achieving a certain goal and a move away from the present itself. This, to be authentic, must be lived in instantaneous flashes, not even one after the other, but each complete and independent. In this way, it is possible to subtract the perception from all rules. The earth is beautiful, especially when freedom is no longer of interest, or better when it can be enjoyed from non-freedom and all its laws. seen as beautiful brushstrokes of a painting that in the distance no longer subdues or imprisons. The obsession with the desire not to be incarcerated is the worst of prisons because it avoids living the condition of enlightened ignorance itself, and this requires abandoning all attempts. The question requires a sublime equilibrium in which the only valid thing is the encounter with pure existence. When one does not live in a pure existence, one protects a limited identity incapable of resisting the absence of sustaining conditions that it itself has created in order not to get out of control. However, since pure existence implies being satisfied with any condition, it is necessary to assume the reality of something that is thus satisfied, unless that real something is diluted in the same condition independently of its character. Here arises and of necessity the discussion about the observer, his existence or absence, his reality or unreality. But I don't continue because I've learned not to offer final results because they are not understood from within and they are ingested as if it had been easy to get to them, or they are discarded because if they don't come from the search itself they become commercial products labeled, packaged and displayed in a showcase. The purchase is made with a numerical value of the same quality, but the product belongs to the unnameable. It represents a unique and irreplaceable state of consciousness. Like light to the blind or sound to the deaf. 11. I discovered Katya's thinking. Here it is. Hundreds of people surrounding me and me nowhere. They dance around my skin and touch me. I move away but they are up, down, on the sides and they want to penetrate me. They pull me and confuse me. I don't know who I am or what I'm doing here. Pain is my only reference. If he abandoned me, he would disappear. That's what my pain is for. I will tell Peter, though I am afraid to tell him, so childish. He gets jealous of everything and is extremely afraid of being left alone. With this pain, who can think of jealousy? It's so absurd to have found it and to feel like I'm taking care of a baby again. Will all men be like this? We all come from a woman, we were born from her and from her we were formed. That's why they become little kids. I can't wait to find a real man. Strong, mature, tender and daring and also rich, very rich and with all the desire to live and without sexual problems and with a gigantic penis. But Peter is not a bad man and he also has a penis and quite appetizing. And then all these problems with money. Who invented money? What a misfortune, but how nice to have it. You can do so many things with it and live so comfortably. Where will I go and why do I see so many people? I've always been bothered by crowds but having them inside my head is the last straw and my father, my God, my father. Now that's a baby and to think that I was so afraid of him. Poor thing, he's a poor man who doesn't know how to live or enjoy. Peter says he's to blame for everything, but Peter doesn't know about the things of the world, he's so naive that sometimes he laughs. But he's so good and sensitive and always a wellspring of ideas. It's a pity that he doesn't have money and can't solve his problems with a woman. I had to suffer all their problems and what a horror. If it weren't for the fact that I fall asleep like a log, I'd be lost anywhere. I'm so fragile and sickly and I've never been like that. Is Peter to blame? He doesn't stop thinking for a second. He always goes beyond simple and spontaneous words and I am simple and spontaneous even though he says it is not true. How many ideas have you put in my head? If I was strong, I wouldn't mind, but the way I am, it's terrible. Sometimes I can't stand it and then I have to take the lead and talk about 1,000 things and then he can't stand it. According to him, he desires silence but his mind never stops. Mine, where am I going and who are these people who want to penetrate me? I'm a witch, that's for sure. Maybe I'm going to die and the ones I see are ghosts. Of course Peter will growl and say he's my shadow and I'll get furious and remember things I don't want to remember. But he encourages them and I can't stand it. Everything should be so simple in life and instead this is hell and my head is a whirlwind and the pain that never leaves me. I don't wish it on anyone, but it is necessary to live it in order to understand, and Peter does not live it and does not understand. How selfish men can be. It's amazing. In this life, death is present at every moment. The body is fragile, and those who neglect themselves are attacked by it like an enveloping glow. The brain is fragile and I fear disability. I've been looking for love all the time. There is nothing greater and more wonderful and the true meaning of existence is to find it. But there is no room for imperfection in him. Any defect kills love. 111. In the distance you can see it, it's a golden cloud tinged with stars. It covers the peak of a mountain and its vibe is warm and loving. It makes you want to get into it because it speaks of the most sacred. On the right, a flower slowly descends. It's pink with reddish edges and floats softly as I look at it. There is the laughter of children and a kind of gentle swaying of children's voices. It looks like the sea caressing the sand. There is moisture in the atmosphere and tiny drops of dew permeate the leaves of the trees. The sunlight produces transparencies throughout and the green vegetation filters through illuminating the earth. It smells like Katya. Her naked body rests in mine. Her back is magnificent, soft, warm, and adorned with freckles. His rounded shoulders rest on the pillow and his steady breathing fills me with rapture. Her golden hair spreads like a flower and its softness envelops me. Your body is of enormous wisdom and love. That's why Osiris obsesses her. I'm inside her, between her gorgeous thighs, feeling the warmth of her insides. Before her, the act of love was concrete sex, but the sensation today is indistinguishable from love itself. It is the earth with all its mystery and maternal affection. How much I've learned. Together we disappear and melt into an abandonment that magnifies us. Separated, the rings of the ego imprison us. Each age has its own point of reference. In mine, my body fits me. Without it I would scatter to pieces. In fact, this is what happens to me, and I come to understand that my dispersion is related to my total ignorance about the earth. I learned years ago to recognize my own body by observing it millimeter by millimeter, but I lost this reference when I placed myself in identification with the observer. Now I'm back in the body because I'm a centaur, and Katya reminds me of that every moment. I also know that it is a voluntary and conscious decision. When I began to glimpse it, I was terribly frightened. I was abandoning the pure spirit for a woman, but something in me prevented me from backing down. I'm a creature too, and I need company. Without it, death is close to me, because I am not sufficient for myself in my experience on Earth. Of course, losing the body will definitely not disperse. At least I hope so. My death will happen at the right time, neither before nor after. By then I will have learned what it takes to stay centered without the need for the border of my skin. Now, there are those who consider that the desire for the center is an escape from pure existence, a simple desire and a need for control. They don't understand that there are techniques to get there and that they are abandoned when they arrive. They confuse the arrival with the means to reach the goal. The goal disappears when I touch it, and that's my main problem. I've reached so many goals that I'm no longer able to recognize where I am. Suddenly, I relive a process and feel it as my own, but I don't know my own place until I jump it and glimpse it from the next step. I'm also criticized for my obsession with inner work. Whoever does so has not the slightest idea of its meaning and value. The problem is that because I don't accept valuing myself for the past, I am deflected by such criticism. I submit to them because in the present there is no history and therefore no individuality. Writing happens when a cycle ends. It's like menstruation in women. My particular notion of existence is that it belongs to space. At times such a phenomenological consideration has led me to think that I suffer from a total lack of sequentiality. I'm not interested in money, fame, pride, or dignity. All these things seem superfluous to me, but being surrounded by human beings who do not understand that any valuation is incompatible with true life, and not knowing how many goals I have managed to achieve and therefore not knowing myself from the outside, I let myself be lost among the others because they manifest an unfailing security. All of this is inherited from my father and a product of his inability to live the lives of his children as valid and important. I've come to think that I don't need the approval of others anymore, but it's false and it scares me too much. I've come to think that it doesn't bother me or fear death, but it's also false. I've come to think that I know myself totally, but that's also false. It's your turn again, Katya. A garden and me planting rose bushes. Why can't I live barefoot in the ground, wet from the rain and with my hands inside the roots of plants? Life is getting harder and harder, but everything has its reason for being, and complaining about what you don't have is ignoring what you do have. The problem is to avoid inheritance and the education of one's parents. Those who have lived what I have experienced cannot remain in permanent joy. I have thousands of wounds. I've allowed myself to be manipulated by everybody. I have submitted because I repeat my father in every man I meet, in every condition I live in my own interior. That's the worst of it. It's already inside me, and many times I catch myself doing the same thing I do. In him I hate. I talk about illnesses, I complain of pain, and I walk unsatisfied. Poor Peter, how did he put up with me so much? I don't know if it's because he really loves me or because he looks like me. Sometimes I think I'm not at their level and that makes me feel worthless. The problem is that I offer him everything I can and he never seems satisfied. Well, not ever, but generally. I am amazed at the simultaneity of his maturity and his immaturity. Sometimes I hear it and it seems to me that God speaks through his mouth. Other times I hear it and see it as a little child throwing a tantrum. I am confused by his need for me, and deep down I suspect that he will abandon me at any moment. That's why I don't take it as seriously as he would like. I know I'm defending myself because something tells me that if I turn myself in, it will kill me. She complains about my abandonment, but I have been totally honest and therefore everything I do is justifiable. On the other hand, I keep him in need. I've seen that it gives results, but I also know that I shouldn't overdo it. I don't know if I'm stronger than him or weaker. I just know that it's time to do whatever I want. If he loves me he will have to accept me, and if not, so much the worse for him. I have the strength and I am not willing to give it to anyone no matter how much I am asked. I've suffered enough to make another mistake. After all, men die too quickly and leave you with appalling burdens. Peter will also die, but I will be so protected that it will not affect me more than necessary. Of course I will miss him, he is divine and makes love a delight, but he is not the only man in the world and I have already lived my life and I will never be able to repeat what I lived. Peter complains and the truth is that he is right, but he will have to overcome this useless habit and accept reality as it is. I'll never submit to anyone again, and if Peter doesn't like it, no way. How bad I am sometimes. Actually, I do. What's more, I adore him but far away and independent. Sure, sometimes we're close, we're on Earth and I'm a woman, but not too close or for too long because that just causes problems. The most important thing is to ensure that there is never a shortage of money. Work comes first. Again he didn't come. I waited for her for 6 hours and she didn't come. He has a lot of work, he says, and what he wants most is to be with me, but he can't. The problem is that I feel like I'm going to explode in frustration. Patience has a limit and I'm about to go crazy. I feel emasculated and surrounded by impediments. It's worse than a prison because it's inside of me, drowning me in helplessness. It confuses me terribly. If she told me she didn't love me or accepted that I'm some kind of toy to her, then I would jump out of my place and achieve freedom. But he doesn't tell me. She assures me that I am the most important thing to her, but she treats me like second-hand garbage. If I understood the love I feel, the desire to share everything, the desire to just be in it, but he doesn't understand. She only gets excited when she sees it in a movie, but not when it happens to her. It's very strange and I'm about to explode. My mind scolds me, tells me to leave her, to look for a woman who is less complicated, younger and without so many wounds. But I can't leave her and I don't know why. It's a different way of valuing life. For me, it exists, and the consequence of my vision is manifested by the time I dedicate to it. For her, I only exist half-heartedly, and that manifests itself in the almost zero importance she gives to being with me. Everything is more important than me. She was in love but she's not anymore. When she was in love, there was only love, and now time, work, and money take the place of her heart. It's like he has a hole in his soul. Nothing is maintained and everything passes through it like a valve without a container, a soul without a center, a spirit without a handhold. There is nothing but obligation and order. Feeling takes a back seat. On the other hand, for me it's all about heart and I can't stand living in the coldness of structures. Reality changes depending on thinking and attitude. The beings with whom we interact feel the reality we perceive and become members of it. Very few realize that in the absence of human beings, judgments and evaluative structures and thoughts would disappear from space and the universe would cease to exist as such, to be transformed into a strange existence. We think that man is part when he is a container. Without definitions and without human thought, reality would be totally transformed. If there were only one human being left on the planet, he would have to learn to live through total transformations. Perhaps it could not resist or sustain any reality. Surely the familiar one would vanish. Man is thus an active creator, but it is difficult to realize this. It's the same with Katya. His way of perceiving me manifests itself to me in thoughts that I feel come from myself when in reality I become a part of his reality. It is an illusion of terrible consequences because it dilutes my being into another, and if this other does not have responsibility or center it murders my self-knowledge. All the blame lies with an absence of elements on Earth and an excess of retrograde planets. That's terrible. Two human beings shouldn't make love if they don't live together. This is not a matter of morality or custom, but rather an energetic one. 7. The energy is broken in the instant in which the self is betrayed. He then releases his protege and leaves him at the mercy of the lions. Passions overflow, the center is lost, the mind is obstructed, and the consciousness is dispersed. Everyone has a protector who cares for and ennobles, but the decision to keep or leave them depends on who deserves it. There are warnings, but they are subtle. Everyone understands them the first time, but if you don't listen to them, they get lost, overshadowed by the noise, until they are forgotten. This is what happens in every test. The first warning, if heeded, serves as a catapult for transformation. That's how you move forward if you listen. If you don't listen or act in congruence with what you've heard, you go backwards and time drags on. Each creature has the same opportunities, but the time to reach them changes depending on attention and bravery. Now that I think about it, when you go backwards, you forget what used to exist as a conquered platform. We go back to the beginning and each step that was left and each conquest is experienced as new despite the fact that it repeats the past. There is, however, a difference, and that is that what has been newly conquered is no longer lost. Before, it was only half won, But now each step has death as an alternative and nothing is endured, and therefore from the bottom what has been revived is renewed. Since every step of death was rescued, death is never returned to on that journey of the past. Death awaits at every step because if the pass is not crossed, it attacks there and in that death it remains. That is why those who say that there is only one death are wrong. Thousands of kills are waiting to attack their prey and so the replays are only of secondary topics. Or perhaps each repetition deepens until the last one is no longer surpassed. There he is mortally wounded who has dared so much. It is a spiral that penetrates the earth and each turn brings a red-hot core all inflamed. Whoever touches the nucleus is incinerated and there no escape perished. That's why you also defend yourself every time you predict that the next spiral will bottom. To hit rock bottom is to touch oneself in a place that cannot be understood or observed. To touch oneself is to arrive at the myth without surpassing it. There, near the core, death awaits and those who overcome it no longer perish. You will have gained eternal life on that rung. Just as there are deaths, there are lives, not one, but many. Every death conquered is eternal life gained. Like onion peels, like semi-transparent curtains, each one to a consecrated step. Children are left behind at every turn. They survive and continue their journey independently and alive. They are our descendants, the ones we have left behind as we pass from rung to step, from level to level, from spiral lap to spiral turn. If a child is born with the woman he loves, he will belong to the rung he has just given birth to and carry it all his life. He will repeat his theme to the point of boredom and each repetition will give birth to a grandchild until in the main one the newborn ethereal grandson acquires flesh and walks through the world as child throwing as his grandfather from whose myth he comes. Progress in each generation is slow but sure because each of the deaths left behind in the lives given birth, new turns of the spiral build. This is how the lattice nets are woven. From there arises the lattice within which each one lives and from which experience feeds. We think we are alone and isolated and we don't realize that the network covers and penetrates us, makes us feel what we feel and live what we experience. We think we are many and isolated when we are one and confused. Therefore, the last man on the planet will face the void and will have to endure himself by reliving the only theme that survives. There are two ways of looking at the world. In one, objects are real and absolute and exist by themselves. The world surrounds you and you are in the middle moving from place to place. In the other, you stand on a raised platform and what appears comes from yourself. Nothing is real except you. 8. I speak again. Katya, from my heart, your existence is like that granite wall. Your emotions are as real as the dirt I walk on. Here the ego is necessary and every theory is superfluous. Either they gobble you up or you do and life is hard and hard work. If you escape with theories you will end up disappearing. The real is manifested at every moment and it is better to live in the present without desires or comparisons. It is like an absence of mind and a total presence of self-consciousness. It is pure existence without thoughts. It's not even theorizing about the self. We carry it inside us all the time and its contact is natural and spontaneous or it is not real. There is no room for projects or comparisons. There is no room for the past or the future. It is total presence and absolute remembrance of reality. What life offers is what God gives. Ignorance manifests itself in distrust. Not even faith helps because there is no future. It's all now. No regulation is acceptable, no established order is real. Everything happens as it should be and yet how much stamina do you have to enjoy it like this? I wonder if you are really dissatisfied or if you only suffer from vain desires. It is you who is not flattered by the goddess of full satisfaction or man is no longer willing, due to an energetic malfunction, to struggle in that direction. I'm hopeful it's you. I really can't blame anyone but yourself. The fault of my anger is this thirsty garden. He wants water, he demands it, he causes wind in the hope of attracting clouds, but he only creates dust and that must cause him frightful frustration. I must accept the existence of the earth as a being. He possesses inclinations, desires, and pride. She is enraged when her pleas are not heard, she is shaken into lyric convulsions when those who inhabit her exasperate her with their tantrums. It has a life of its own and communicates it. Either one connects with it and experiences it in consciousness and heart as existing and real, or one is still subject to its influence but misunderstands it. It's the same with the body or the mind. What are they but mental illnesses or sufferings? One represses the messages and they become somatized, one does not listen to one's own consciousness and the consequence is inner emptiness. It is the same with women and men, either they give themselves completely to each other and live together and understand each other's influences, work with them and take care of each other, or they become dislocated because they do not know where what they feel comes from. The worst is when there is a lag. The man gives himself and the woman does not or vice versa. It is the same as when the earth is ignored by man without understanding that it sustains him and is always present. One suffers at the expense of the other. I'm afraid that's what's happening to me with Katya. All their messages are about independence and mine are about involvement. Her unconscious encompasses me and she doesn't take responsibility for it, nor does she perceive it or experience it. I water the garden and sense their gratitude. Everything has its own nature, and it is entirely respectable. The man has a mold and this is his main theme. The human has as its goal to reach the human. Nothing is more satisfying to man than to come to himself. Those who are not satisfied with it and want to transpose it end up with the opportunity to enjoy themselves, to enjoy their legacy and inheritance. The mind is the filter of wakefulness. A deamble full of remorse, pain and sorrow. I'm assailed by fear and then jealousy. I miss Katya and everything makes me lonely. That is my daily conscience, equal to that of so many men and women. Suddenly I remember that I can observe my fears, witness jealousy, and see pain from a place that is beyond all of them and closer to myself. I leap out of the prison of my mind. I watch her from outside the bars and rejoice. It increases my freedom and I hope returns. I am in self-consciousness, in remembering myself, in the place where I really am. I continue to observe and add to the world in the act of witnessing. I look at my body, my mind and the environment and suddenly I take another leap and the world and I disappear as separate entities. All is one and I am that. I attain unity consciousness. I understand that there are 3 different levels of consciousness. The first is that of the mind and its prisons. The second is the self and is activated when I observe the first. The third is unity consciousness, and it appears when I hold observation for a long period and incorporate new contents into the act of witnessing. I realized that India had already described the process in Patanjali's yoga by calling it samyama and using it to gain direct knowledge of any object, event or organism. Samyama also has 3 levels. Suppose I want to meet a flower. Samyama's first step is to observe her. There is still a flower there separate from me, who sees it through the filter of my mind. If I am sad, the flower will appear before my eyes with sadness, if melancholy, melancholy, if joyful, happy. Samyama's next step is to keep the observation. As I do so, I slowly melt into the flower. I begin to know it from the inside, and if I keep the observation I end up merging into unity consciousness with the flower. It is no longer the flower separated from me, but the flower and I united. I do not logically understand the flower, but I feel it in its experience as my own. I didn't accept needing. I stopped desiring a companion, money, success, and friendships. I was out of the world. I skipped a stage. I didn't pass through it, but over it. It was enough for me to be with myself. Then I realized that they did need me and that my way of being was hurtful. I decided not to hurt when Katya appeared. From not hurting so much, I started to need it. She, however, stopped doing so. Now it's all suffering because I'm already in the world and I can't get out of it. I hate Katya for doing this to me. She has a place in her heart and soul and she goes through what I give her. Nothing is guarded. It is a bottomless barrel and in it I have deposited my best feelings and ideas, believing that they will bear fruit, but they do not. They pass through it and leave no trace. I want a partner and not a bottomless barrel, a woman with dedication and not a beloved adventurer of emotions and without a center. I hate Katya and yet I need her. I can't stand being away from her and she does everything she can not to see me. Katya is a monster. He deserves a suffering equal to the one he causes me. I hate Katya and yet I adore her. 12. Speak again, Katya. It's a huge weight that I carry. I have to take care of my children, educate them, make money, cook, do laundry, and still carry Pedro and his needs for companionship. I don't want to hurt him, but I don't have time for him. For a long time I lived in subjugation and in fear of not being enough for myself and now I have to prove to everyone that I can be self-sufficient. I'm sorry for Pedro, because I love him, but I'm more important and I should love myself more than anyone else. I hope he will leave me alone with his demands, that he will agree to see me only when I decide and in my time and as long as he waits for me, that he will remain faithful and united to me because I need him. When I feel bad, he understands and comforts me. That should be enough for him and not demand more from me than I can offer. Love will come in its own time. There are those who find it at the age of 70 and I still have many years ahead of me. For now, it's all about success, hard work, and money. I need financial peace of mind and to prove to the one who had me subdued and trembling that I can get ahead on my own and be as rich or richer than him. I understand that Peter is in the reality of love, but for now there is no time for that. I must be practical and realistic and the earth must be first. The only problem is that I'm afraid Pedro won't take it and will go with someone else, but I've learned to control him the way I want and the poor guy doesn't even notice. I'm stronger than him and what counts is keeping him in uncertainty. Confusion is the best weapon. If I can overcome his clarity and connect him with his shortcomings, I will have him for myself whenever and however I want him. I have suffered too much to suffer more, and never again for another man. I feel sorry for him because I love him, but I'm learning to love myself more than anyone else, and he taught me this. She always insisted on the need for me to be myself and not let myself be subjugated by anyone, and I learned the lesson well. The best thing is sex. That's where I tie it up and that's where I have it. I won the battle and now I relax and enjoy my triumph. What I gained is control, what I gained is freedom from the man by placing myself above him, with his penis penetrating me, yes, how nice, but me at the top controlling and him at the bottom passive and smiling while I enjoy myself. I'm like that, cold and calculating, and I don't do anything without first planning it. My name was sullied and now I regain my power. Nothing is more important, nothing else remains, and nothing is remembered except one's name. 13. I dreamed of you again. You were total magic, and every word of yours contained the truth from the deepest and most sacred. We were sitting at a table and you were talking to me. You told me what was coming and what was. You encouraged me to continue. Dark people came in with the confidence of your words. I made them feel. I touched their hearts and all their violence was transformed into kindness and tenderness. You saw me and congratulated me. The important thing is the heart and the love. Money is metal, it is an empty hole and its path leads to nothingness. I woke up thinking about Katya. She is cold and calculating and is more interested in money than love, power more than tenderness, success more than humility. You had already warned me and I didn't listen to you, and now I'm paying the consequences of my deafness. I am learning to understand that there are beings without a heart. They claim to possess it and boast about it, but their actions show just the opposite. They get excited about coins and are willing to sacrifice everything for them. When this happens in a woman, it's a shame. She becomes a prostitute of life. That's Katya and I should have seen it before, but my love blinded me. That's what you told me in my dream, but I can't remember your words. She only recalled the feeling of having been with you, a real human being, a real woman and not a centerless imposter like Katya. The time will have to come when my shame is greater than my desire, my dignity more powerful than my loneliness, and then the spell that binds me, the prison that imprisons me, will be broken, and I will be free again to be myself with myself, without desire for companionship, without longing for what may be but is not. By their words you will know them, said my teacher, and it's true. You can talk, but if the deeds don't coincide with the words, the deeds are worth more because in them is the truth. Katya says she loves, but she is more interested in money than her heart. Someday I will understand it in my whole being, and then contempt will arise. For now, I still can't believe it. It is not possible for a woman to be so dry, so mental and cold, so desolately concrete. I can't believe it because if I come to believe it, I'll have to accept that human beings can exist in that condition and that would end my innocence. The truth is that it is absurd to be so interested in others, but you can only understand what happens to me if you know the unity. Those who live in it know that others and oneself exist in identity. Therefore, to accept prostitution in others is to become them, and that is terrible. 14. I recognize in you my own heart, Katya of my life. I know that in the depths of your soul there is all the tenderness of the feminine and that you only taste independence because you need to conquer it. You only gain what you go through, never what you skip. The ego becomes being only if the ego has been lived in and transformed. The jumps act like boomerangs. You think you're definitely there, but sooner or later you come back. On the other hand, if you go through it, you don't go back, the same will happen with you. When you conquer your independence, you will be able to surrender without feeling that you are lost. On the other hand, if you leap into surrender without first having gained your being, you will feel that you are wasted, that you are submitted, that you are being violated. This is the law, and if St. Peter had written it, a priest at Mass would say, "It is the word of God." That is why I am waiting for you, but in the meantime I must be free. I tried non-necessity by running away from the suffering that would come with need. I learned not to need before I needed, and so I returned to the need without having transcended it. I discovered that you don't get free if you haven't tied yourself up first. Freedom must be conquered. I will freely let out everything I feel. I must become poems and sing with them my joy and my pain, my hope and my death, my love and my fear, my sex and my anger, my abandonment and my spirit. The wind cleanses the atmosphere of impurities. Everything is purified, and as it passes through all bodies it communicates and unites them in a golden embrace of perfect transparency. It's like active love. Flowers on brief illuminated nipples that, at the touch of the beloved, emerge from a slow lethargy, contained anxiety, a longing for their size, reddish buds longing for the future act. A tender, rounded belly, soft and delicate, whose center, torn button, shudders to feel the red-hot humidity of the trembling ophidian that plays daring in it. Carving in sculpture, linear and precious column that widens sinuous feminine power in astonishing vision. Strong pink thighs of decorated freckles ending in a mysterious, Dark and millenary forest that hides a delicious delicacy, juicy confinement that opens its scented doors only when the rest of the trust has been conquered. To enter into such a deep and guarded, warm and loving offering, confusing what is penetrated with what penetrates it. Voluptuous dances sucking the stored fire until in a telluric eruption of a red-hot volcano, two beings in excessive pleasure become one. Rivers of creamy lava, the promise of life, refreshing bathe the mystery revealed, what all matter hides, what jealously awaits, what animates the whole. 16. For 2 years I lived locked up, contained. It was an all-white room with only a furnished cushion. I would sit on it and go off in amazing meditation, lost in the clouds, needing nothing. Then, if an emotion came, he would observe it, follow its winding path, and focus on its destiny. When something startled me, I compared it to the events that a shortwave radio handed me. An earthquake in Albania and my back hurt. A massacre in Beirut and I was confused. I heard after the wound and after the confusion, and so I understood that my body was expanding. Everything came to me and I felt everything, and in unity I swayed. I only achieved this when I kept myself in inner silence. When my reason spoke, it died down. One conclusion stood out: El vejestorio inútil de la razón. In the detachment of the world, it rejoices, as if it were being experienced for the first time, just as from the silence his harmonious song the word offers. It is from the primordial emptiness that color and form appear. In that everything offers full teaching, since there one understands that creation is one's own. Reason does not understand it, but who is she? Old and worn out soup, leftovers from other times. Useless old age that no longer offers anything. Now, the commitment is to understand everything from the silence that shines inside. 17. Conquered sensitivity has its price. I can follow Katya in the distance. I recognize their moods and the alterations of their emotions. I know when pleasure invades her and before whom, unarmed, she is seduced. Then I follow his guilt and the deception he offers me closely. I stop trusting her and my mind goes crazy. I look for a way out, someone to trust completely, and I find the same thing as Saint Teresa. God enough, said Saint Teresa, but of the God to whom she referred, we all live in different ways. It is he who blossoms in the heart of the pair of lovers and communicates to them in an unbearable measure. It is he who enlightens the mind of the one who nourishes his life with the mystery of man. Who in whom realizing the I that dwells in each one of us astonishes us and mystifies us. It is also he who in pain discovers us as witnesses when we see from the being that is focused on each of us. 18. I have no choice but to watch because my mind, wounded by confusion, can't help but feel the betrayal. I fall into sadness and complain about the absurd gain of my 2 years of seclusion. I awakened a new sense, a new perception. Like a man born blind from cataracts who, after being operated on, faces an unknown and terrifying world. Some decide to close their eyes so as not to see, but I don't have eyelids to prevent the entry of what I feel. He penetrates me without my consent. I'll have to learn, I'll have to find. To the conqueror of sadness. Sadness is an empty circle. Narrowing its measurement in stagnant descent, it finds the dark wave of stamped sulfur. The curls of a bluish-red sea tinge her with fright, but it is easily defeated. It is enough to accept it without measure. To get to the bottom of your uprising without fear, with daring. There it is transformed by being observed. 19. Observing transforms when its use is not by flight and when it is accompanied by acceptance and understanding. It is always a leap, but it returns when what prevented us from reaching the light is not corrected. I recognize in myself 3 darknesses. 3 darknesses my soul knows. One real, one welcome, the last, painful. The real one for raping me ensues. My intellect is extinguished, my mind dries up and I dissolve into nothingness because I am not listened to. The welcome is an interface and the pain for the others appears. The interface is the lapse of nothing that appears on the big scale between 2 rungs. Neither what was before satisfies nor what is to come is known. But it is observed, it is recognized that it is darkness gained, not by provoked infidelity. Later, the new step is stepped on and the previous darkness is appreciated, it was welcome catapult. That which comes upon others is painful. Sex back out of desire, no attachments or money, no motivation for achievement, only being without the need for outsiders, by others is seen as unhealthy darkness betraying the usual way of life. If the others, by proxy, suggestions, or fears, convince, the painful one becomes rape. But there is also a fourth when nothing is recognized anymore and in enlightened ignorance everything becomes new. In the blissful night in secret when no one saw me and I looked at nothing, with no other light and guidance but that in which the heart burned. After I have put myself in nothing, I lack nothing. He who wants nothing, wants everything. Welcome darkness has an outlet when it is observed. The painful one is diverted by the soul's compassion for those who provoke it. The real one is a warning for the mystery sent. Woe to him who does not listen to her. Loses everything in it. The fourth is the way of life of the one who, like me, seeks God in everything. Suddenly, I can stop judging Katya and see her in a new light. I realize that what I'm judging comes from the past and I relax. I accept that I perceive only what I filter, and if I see through myself I only see what I want to see. I've judged Katya because I see her through my own fears for me. St. John of the Cross. History Legacies. She finds herself on a path that belongs only to her. I need her because she is the owner of the earth just like any woman, because that is the destiny of the feminine, relieving the earth and fertilizing it. Without it, there is no earth. With it arises the desire and need to receive in the same measure as I give. I fall into sin by withdrawing from the watcher and ceasing to have access to oneness. She doesn't seem to need me, and instead of seeing it as an example, I am filled with passion and anger for not being recognized. I shout at her from inside, but she doesn't know, and if she does, she lets him go through the hole that has opened so many wounds and deposits him in an empty sack, in a drain that flows into the sea of uncertainty. I write him a love poem in the hope that somewhere in his mind it will be inscribed. How can I say without modesty what I most desire? May the light of my consciousness illuminate your path. That by accepting my love you give yourself without measure. May you feed your soul from my activated heart. May you never abandon me by acknowledging that your life without mine is a cold bonfire of extinguished logs without direction or joy. But it is all in vain. The farther I get away from myself, the more happiness and joy I manifest. 21. Speak one last time. Katya. At first I fell totally in love with Pedro. Nothing was more important and valuable than to be by his side, to hear him, to feel him, to touch him, a company. I left my children, I forgot about money and reality. I only saw him and nothing else existed. Now it's different. I love him, but the world has come to fruition, and so have other men. I have freed myself from my passion. I know he senses it and asks me about my love. I don't lie to him. He told him the truth but not all of it. I love him, but I don't dare admit that I don't love him anymore. There is a huge difference, but I am careful not to confess it to you. I'm afraid I'd lose him forever, and he couldn't stand that. Love is blind. One gives oneself whole, unconditionally. It is a fire that burns the heart and soul, and before it is not possible to put any thought or defense before it. Wanting is more sensible. It allows you to go on with life without getting lost. I can work, I can plan, I can take care of my children, I can give myself space and distance. In addition, the will is shared. Of course, I'm not telling you this. I make him believe that he's the only one. I tell him I need space, but I don't mention anything else. I wouldn't understand. I have not betrayed him or abandoned him. I just do my life and I still want it. When I offered him my love and gave myself completely, he rejected me. He didn't appreciate it or understand it. So why not do the same? Of course, it's not revenge, it's simply my nature, like this. This is me. 22. When I met you, you were destroyed and sick. Someone had confused you and you got lost, engulfed by its handling. It gave you financial security but destroyed your soul. That's how you gave yourself to me. Your body radiated anguish and your mind confusion. Your energy was unbearable, but I decided to heal and protect you. I taught you who you were, I reminded you to recognize yourself as valuable. I offered you all my knowledge and little by little you healed. I became responsible for you and began to love you. I gave myself to you and wanted to live with you, and you excluded me from your life when you no longer needed me. Now everything has been reversed. I went beyond my limits until I lost my dignity. One day you love me and the next you forget about me, and I'm always by your side, waiting for you, asking you for love. Now I don't know who I am anymore because your uncertainty has penetrated me and taken over my mind. Suddenly, I come to my senses and realize my worth, but something in me fears that I am not self-sufficient and places my existence in you, vitally. You decide whether I'm worth or not, whether I'm worthy or despicable, whether important or mediocre. But nothing in you is stable, and so I oscillate between your remembrance and your forgetfulness, your appreciation and your contempt. Yet I love you. You are absolutely real and true, and you fight for your integrity like no one else. You're like birds or fish. You inhabit the earth and are its creature of choice. 22. I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, suddenly and without any noise. Something is troubling me, and as I am already penetrating the future, I sense that the cause of my anxiety comes from an event to come. I sit in the lotus blossom and meditate. I observe my thoughts and my bodily sensations until I come to myself. I lie down and stay awake. I feel the house and the murmurs of the early morning. Simultaneously dream. I am in wakefulness and dreaming at the same time. I don't control content, I just let it pass through me, and unfamiliar scenes and characters start to appear. I realize again that I am awake and asleep at the same time. Finally only sleep remains. I visit a house similar to mine but with some differences that seem strange to me. I can't find my radio and a strange device appears in its place. In the middle of sleep I decide to wake up. I open my eyes and get out of bed. I go to the kitchen and the furniture doesn't match the usual. I walk around the room and the same thing happens. I realize that I woke up inside my dream in another dream. I decide to wake up again. I open my eyes and finally recognize my home. I get out of bed and sit down in the dining room chair. I look at the curtains and find them different from my own. It terrified me. I'm in a second awakening inside a dream. The feeling begins to become unbearable. I can't find the waking world. And I prefer it 1,000 times more than these strange places that are not mine, that I do not recognize and that have no continuity. I desire the familiarity of wakefulness, and the only procedure I know of to find it, opening my eyes. It doesn't work for me. I try again and another house appears different from mine, full of people who are not familiar to me. I don't even like to be conscious within my dream. I used to long for a lucid dream, but it's more pleasant in theory than this frightful labyrinth of unusual awakenings and strange places. I realize that I am about to get lost in madness for good, and I'm desperately fighting to wake up to the real world. I open my eyes and finally find it. I have no doubts. I get out of bed and make myself a chocolate. I'm grateful to be back, and it occurs to me that what I've just experienced is what the recently dead must experience. I know this to be true, and I understand the need to better prepare myself to transpose my own death. I pray that if I had been able to remember the Watcher, my lucid dreams would have been transformed into paradise. I reproach myself for my lack of preparation and talk to Katya and tell her everything. She understands me and her voice caresses me with the reality of the earth. I thank God for having her with me. 24. Katya visits me at night. She talks to me and I realize that I can see her from the outside. She is delighted with life and its accomplishments, and her eyes sparkle with contentment and happiness. I forget all my judgments and just want her. I want to support her, and I rejoice with her and congratulate her for all that she does. Like my 5 awakenings in the same dream, now that I hear it, 5 dialogues coexist in me. In one I listen to her, in the next I analyze her state and catalog it as euphoric. In the third, I think of an answer that doesn't stimulate her ego but at the same time helps her on her way. In the fourth, I judge whether their state of consciousness and values are the same as mine. In the fifth, I feel my body and find a desire for silence and caresses. Will she do the same as me? How many Katyas coexist during your monologue? I know that she also cares about helping me and is on the lookout for any signs of self-evaluation or judgment on my part and corrects them. Katya talks about her state and her love of life. It mentions God and includes me in we believe in him within a special mysticism. Never before had he referred to the two of them with a we. I love her and I feel like what I've always wanted is finally happening. I remember a poem I dedicated to another woman wishing she were Katya. I feel that now it is hers since she has also managed to incorporate the MOS alive inside. In forgetfulness of the living God, I traveled to Mount Carmel. In an exquisite body, Virgo ascendant, a fiery-haired Scorpio drew meaning next to a praying mantis. Ask him about his search with such devoted seriousness. I am a convert. I look for God within and find him. I knew then that it was in her that I wanted so much. It is that which in its encounter asks for nothing, everything gives, does not condition its sweetness, everything tender, enough and superfluous. It is not spent, it does not depend, it is always there. What are you looking for? He asked me in a sweet voice. The same as you find, the living God within. XXV, my mission in this life is not visible, my true mission. I realize that when I need cleansing the wind blows, that when I connect with my center everyone connects, that when I discover myself, everyone discovers myself. I am in everyone and everyone is in me. My mission in this life is to achieve happiness because in it we all achieve it. I don't know what I need is deserved and therefore I confuse what I am with what I don't deserve. What I long for most is inner peace because there I fulfill and yet I realize that I am moving away from it. My actions are subordinate to others and I can't stand them. I stand on an elevated platform from which I observe. My well-beloved, this has stimulated me by leaving me so abandoned, because it has inadvertently provoked one. Death to the well-beloved. His soul rebels when he finds in others voluntary deceptions. Protest because others are different. Yell so dedicated, but with her beloved, who has given himself to her, she is converted into others. She suffers from not being understood, but she doesn't understand that she receives what she offers. She is scandalized when she sees the damage that others inflict on those who are well-beloved, and she does not see the wound she inflicts on those who have given themselves to her. Sad, immaculate, who complains about others without understanding the death it produces in those who have fallen in love with her. But she's not to blame. She was subdued from birth, confused with double messages, far from her center. It became one mediocre woman. Woe to that evaluated woman who, because she does not recognize her worth, perishes. He becomes a cruel being when he does not value the love that is offered to him. Woe to the man who offers himself to such an entity. Devoured, he ends up mortally wounded, always waiting, always losing his innocence. 26. The shadow. Those who do not accept their own gradually become external, they turn it into an external one. Soon, immense shadow has created and lost everything. Guilty, they look to others by castrating their experience. He wants to be perfect and that's how he becomes mediocre. I transform at every moment. Suddenly, I feel the closeness of my shadow and I become it. I look at it and come back to myself and nothing can define me. Then I remember my body and go through it. He becomes my most stable reference and I appeal to him when I float to escape. Later, with a leap, I approach the same space that I inhabit, and I become it. There I feel everything because in it there is no distance or time. I feel what in my body is distant is immediate, and I touch everything, making it my own. When I remember you in Love Katyumiya, a poem I remember, woman. Total seriousness in every sentence, intense language because the borders on understanding. Only life in every image and thought. Total delivery at all times. Such is the feminine, a pampered, beautiful and clear kitten that is suspicious of the darkness because it does not find its beloved in it. Mystic I become, and in metaphysics I glide. There is no greater pleasure or enchantment equal. I am space and matter into consciousness I transform. I remember the Jewish god and his Kabbalistic nickname, the Tetragrammaton. Consciousness is in everything from the tiny pebble, the rounded dewdrop, the dog, and the galaxy. It is on three-dimensionality that it sustains itself by penetrating to an unequal extent into the fourth, residence of the observer. Tetragrammaton is the observer of consciousness who testifies from the fourth dimensionality. It is the human being, penetrating like no other, who understands the above. It is when he understands this that he realizes that his true mission here on earth is the consciousness to rescue from all matter. What comes to mind is that I find myself in everything I write. I write from behind the text and mix prose and verse in a new attempt to give freshness to my life. I remember Costa Rica, a country full of charm, and its jungle and between two rivers a divine hacienda, Sibuju, from which one day I was watching it rain from Sibuju. The green grace of the banana trees, sinuous mirrors of water. The silvery grays of the sky painting hues throughout, the sound of the river, the calm. And I'm from the inside wanting to turn my skin out to be everything. In unity consciousness all is one. There is no separation between the one who sees and the seen. Everything answers and every event teaches that, he who sees, the vision and the seen are one. I look from space without a limited body as if in seeing, vision, the one who sees and what is seen are the same. The vision sees itself without a subject, I and you are the same. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one like him who sees and sees it. 27. Renaissance. Impossibility is the lie of those who confuse life with the forced confinement of the structure that he himself has created. Suddenly, immense walls hide the true light, imprison the sun, destroy the view. They suffocate without understanding that their own thoughts have been invented by the prison. So easy to see them from the outside, so arduous from the inside. It is easy to transform them when the mind has transcended it. It is impossible to observe them when, for fear of abandonment, one prefers not to question one's own confinement. But when we take the step, trusting in death, recognizing the infinity that blossoms in each one, joy is awakened, hope interferes, transforming darkness into life. Praise be to the moment when the wall cracks and through the opening the dew is glimpsed, the smell of wet earth penetrates illuminating the soul of well compassion, making the sleeping strings of love reborn, vibrate. There, in that instant, life is decided. With immense power the wall falls wounded, and the dance is activated. The new being awakens as a newborn baby, prostrating himself gratefully among luminous stars, a sublime condition of humility recognized before the power of life. How many times does guilt intrude and mistrust blossoms, penetrating everything and tinged it with gloomy meaning? On the other hand, everything changes when one forgives oneself. I discovered what a gift was given to me in a healthy body, an expanded brain, a sharp mind, a whole heart. That I have not made adequate use of all of this, I have wasted myself. I have not extracted from my own matter, all the consciousness. I am guilty of the deterioration which my limited consciousness in my wise body has produced. But today, knowing all that I have not profited from, I forgive myself and pray for wisdom enough to be able to respect what was given to me. Forgiving myself is the beginning of my new birth. To accept what my body asks, to silence the internal dialogue so small, limited, tiny, an executioner who thinks he knows everything, when not even his gift has understood or respected. 28. True love. I finally understand, love is bestowal, never return. The one who loves does not seek to be rewarded in any exchange. He who has liberated another is liberated. He loves those who don't ask for anything in return. Just giving of yourself, just loving, just love. Who offers himself to reason by weaving everything with it, he perishes, forgetting in his sacrifice that heart and joy with logic do not flourish. It is in love that the statuity becomes numb, illuminating the soul of daring, intense brilliance before which the net vanishes. Only love is the answer, only love. I was taught at once to offer homage. Works and missions, goals pursued. Don't stop or savor what you've gained. Always chased and chasing. No one explained to me that life is enough and that existence is its only meaning. The same conclusions but in the process penetrating, I enjoy the time slowing down immensely. No thought is overlooked. And the reason for existence, projections and paths in the sunlight glimpsing. If he loved her with it, accompanying her more than life the man longed for. Nothing, just life intensely living. Love has so many secrets and comes, like the observer from beyond the universe. It is a paradoxical event that the love I feel from the center of the universe, emanating from Plutonian strength, immense power, I see it as discouragement. I see it in the twilight of weakness invested. It is the fault of my dead who do not know the feeling. They confuse it with their breath by assembling habits of confinement. Mediocre structures of unhealthy security. They have seen only the concrete, and their already withered body. Instead of giving it to the wind, to the sun and to the risk, they offer it to the worms that in their humid tomb feed on the rotten flesh, rejoicing in the heat given off by the fermented juices, the putrefying nipples. It was a terrible mistake to sacrifice the warm sun of life, not to surrender when God bestowed rhythm and movement. To confuse the love I feel with weakness and discouragement, not knowing that surrender comes from the center of the universe. 29. Nor do I long for freedom, because it too, like love, has so many measures and mysteries. How is it possible, I say to myself, that none of this is taught, that in schools it is not seen and analyzed, felt and experienced? I want to recover what I have lost, to unlearn what we have learned. To establish a new, more blessed order. It is not freedom that I am looking for, but something beyond, more complete and direct. I have known freedoms and I do not regret them. One of them, the one gained respect but the other intensely rejected, forced freedom. A gasp that stirs inside because in it I thought I found what I found. Obscure the freedom forced when the one has been left behind. When, after having traversed so much road, I only desire the surrender of a mature woman and in response, fear. When she defends herself from the love she so desires, frightened because she does not understand what I offer. He will have to learn that beyond desire clothed in space and time there is the soft intent of clarity that goes deep into one's own center thus delimited. He will seek to satiate his hope and adventures to return looking for a complete coat. By then, so pained by the forced freedom, imprisoned, in total distrust, I might turn my back on him. XXX. I realize that Katya was a dream my mind made up, a pretext for my sleeping heart to wake him up. I managed to do it and with so much heart activated, little by little I forgot everything. A mirage through a filter of my activated mind. A lure to be caught. But I've woken up and remembered. I am what I am and transformed by no one. As I am, I must be loved and respected. There is nothing in me that is unworthy or contemptible. Because of her I found my heart and because of her I lost my soul. But I've got it back. I remembered who I am and with the vision an image from long ago. A dirt road and a whitewashed house. A barefoot woman in a golden dress waiting. The wind blowing and passing through it. The vision was completed by remembering his name, the twin of my soul, the long-awaited companion, the royal and blessed couple. The mistress of my love, Miriam. Miriam so desired and longed for, so close and clear, so loved because her presence is enough to unlearn what she has learned, to forget the deceptions, to be who I am without ups and downs. I found her waiting for me, just as in the vision of the wind caressed, barefoot and in an ornate white dress. I knew it was her without any doubt and confirmed it when I heard her first words, "Tongue, you've finally arrived." When one is confused with the other cannot love. It is only with distance that reality can be seen. When everyone is completely different, they can come together. Fused into one, they are more than each other. They are two and one and therefore infinite two in one. Delicate and beautiful, mysteriously feminine. I am amazed by your tenderness and capacity for dedication. Your movements are sweet and you are able to give yourself completely without hiding but preserving your fascinating modesty and your contact with the earth. Oh Miriam, you read my mind and recognize my essence and feed my spirit. The happiness of having found you is beyond measure. I can finally say that I am fully alive. Katya was a nightmare, a bad dream, an impure poison that was imposed on me and to which I submitted, losing my dignity and self-esteem. Both women, but one impure and unhealthy, and you a goddess. Katya is death and you are life. 31. Miriam, today I told you about Katya and almost on the verge of crying, lightning began to fall and the sky was covered with clouds and it began to rain. There's no better way to make rain than this, a suppressed cry. You agreed, and we both rejoiced at the discovery. When a feeling is repressed in childhood, it appears in adulthood along with all the logic that has been safeguarded. Everything must be fulfilled and manifested, and in the laws of the appearance of the repressed are contained all the vicissitudes that could not be experienced as a child. You also understood this, and it was clear that language is activated when there is someone who really listens. To be with you, oh, Miriam. It's like being born again. Nothing is foreign to you, and I don't need to make myself understood. Everything is clear and magical, like that making it rain with emotion or that understanding without explaining or convincing. A white light rose from the sky and you were frightened. You thought you were going back hundreds of years, and I visited you in Jerusalem. Hail fell from the sky and you took it in your hands and drank it because you needed heavenly purity, and that was the closest thing to it. You remembered your dialogues as a child with ghosts and the way the coins they made you bury appeared and disappeared. You are magic and innocence together. Fortune and justice are mixed in you along with beauty. Everything you do and say involves your whole person. You believe in me with unwavering confidence. There is no malice or unwholesome intent in you. You're completely female and that's how you express yourself. You always live in a new adventure and you give yourself all over to it. Your skin is pure sensuality and your mouth is a delicious delicacy. You like to go through my body extracting from each part all the pleasure contained therein. You connect with the source of all sweetness and communicate that. To make love to you is to make love to you. Paradise is always new and delightful. You discover the precise movements and the exact caresses to transform the everyday into the divine. Your body is always ready for love and you give it to me complete and fresh, hot and new, magical and mysterious. No judgment describes you, no thought holds you back. These are beyond explanations or techniques. You change at every moment and in everything you offer yourself whole. When you trust, you idealize, and from every phrase you hear, you understand the obvious, what it really means. When you distrust, you are relentless and devastating. If you see someone, you discover his innermost secrets, but of the man you love, you only glimpse the good. I never tire of seeing you, nor do I tire of hearing you and touching you. You are a blessed mystery, the complexity complete, and you are mine as a newborn flower can be, a seed floating in the thicket, whirling in the wind of an enchanted forest. Nothing can possess you, but you possess everyone you observe. You are strength personified, but the charming weakness in you also blossoms, simultaneously and without contradictions. Miriam, I miss you, but there's someone before you, someone I've always looked for. As real as you are also a mirage. 32. He came to see me one morning. She was 17 years old and blind from birth. Her name was Myra and her physiognomy reminded me of a Tibetan daikini. She was accompanied by her parents and a guide dog. He sat across from me and told me that we had been twin brothers in Egypt. He told me the story of our life as Pharaoh's slaves and of our death on the slopes of Mount Sinai. She told me to help her see with my hands and I agreed. For 3 months I taught him extraocular vision, and as that function awoke, he began to remember its origin. He told me that he came from Alion and that his name was Dalamé. I was originally from Andromeda and my name had been Odysseus. In her presence, my mind remembered, and she corroborated the details of my memories. I also understood the Iamento and the prediction of the Ari, Gen 2 more lifetimes that would happen. Now, having remembered, I await the arrival of Kardam, my original father. In some sessions with Myra, she says she recognizes him and encourages me to talk to him. I haven't been able to do it. I have tried several times but without success. It may be out of fear. I can't imagine living on another planet because after all my home no longer depends on a place or place, it's inside me and I take it everywhere. I think I've learned that. I, in this life called Peter, have understood it at last. I have ingratiated myself with women and I see them from a different perspective. Everything is intertwined and what is done leaves a mark. I learn not to require justifications for existence and to always place myself at the limit of myself. Only there is one who has no preconceived plans and acts with spontaneity. My only commitment is to be myself and move forward in love because that is the force that moves the universe and sustains it alive. After all the experiences in so many lives and especially from my experiences with Katya, I have begun to understand that there is a wisdom that lies beyond me and all the notions I have about reality. Every time I have opposed the designs of the spirit, I have died and I have so many deaths on my account that the only thing I want is to flow even at the cost of not understanding. However, I am still not able to be happy living without understanding, although my level of understanding is no longer the usual. It has been transferred to a silent sphere in which everything amazes. The most extraordinary thing is to be able to feel. Sometimes, when I see a color, feel a pleasure or a pain, I settle into the consciousness from which the sensation arises. It is always the same and its main characteristic is that it shines with its own light. Ultimately, I am able to accept what I feel and live on the level at which I feel and live, without trying to reduce it to explanations or concepts. I accept myself as a human being and appreciate the experiences that my condition gives me without wanting more. When I retain this appreciation and this awareness, I can only marvel and be humble. This is what I have learned, and this is what so many lives and so many deaths have led to. Kardam, my real father, has not appeared, perhaps because I have not yet fulfilled what I was intended to learn, or perhaps because I no longer expect it. If he showed up to take me with him, perhaps I would refuse. I can't say for sure, but I can no longer conceive of any difference between life on this planet or any other. In all of them, the consciousness of feeling is the same, and that is enough. Soy Daker Corvette.
Soy Daker Corvette.